Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Linda Curry. To avoid tragedy, sometimes it is enough just to walk away, to leave someone who behaves strangely and potentially dangerously, but in some heartbreaking cases, the victim and the killer remain fated to be together. Leading to an irreversible outcome, Linda was once a charming woman with impeccable taste. She balanced her career during the week with dancing on weekends, which helped her relax and stay active even in her 40s. She looked stunning with her education. Linda achieved professional success, earned a good income, and maintained her perfect image. In 1989, she met Paul Curry at work. Paul quickly impressed Linda with his intelligence. Their relationship gradually developed into marriage, which took place on September 12, 1992, in Las Vegas. Compared to the accomplished Linda, Paul seemed rather ordinary, leaving many to wonder why such a successful woman was attracted to him. Although Linda spoke of him with admiration, their friends felt the couple lacked harmony. Paul was short and not particularly noticeable. Except for his intelligence, he lacked wealth and career success, which he often attributed to his age. Many found Linda's choice unusual. Her friends felt she was simply flattering herself by being with a younger man who was 13 years her junior, about a month after the wedding. Linda called her friend Mary Siebold to tell her that Paul wanted to buy her a $1 million life insurance policy, and Paul is the beneficiary. Soon after, Linda began to experience strange and disturbing changes in her life. Previously full of life and energy, she was now tired all the time, and her appearance was affected. These symptoms caused Linda's relatives and Mary to begin to suspect that Paul might be the cause of Linda's declining health. Paul firmly denied these suspicions and even threatened to sue Mary for slander after she made some unfounded comments. However, this did not alleviate her suspicion that Paul might be behind Linda's difficulties. Mary continued to contact Linda and noticed that she was becoming increasingly weak, sensing that something was wrong. Mary advised Linda to leave Paul, believing that he could be a threat. However, Linda insisted that Paul was not the cause of her health problems. She often spoke highly of Paul, describing him as a loving and devoted husband who showed his affection through compliments and romantic gestures. Linda believed that her problems could stem from the stress of her job rather than her relationship. Despite seeing doctors regularly, Linda's health continued to worsen. The medications prescribed had no noticeable effect. Back in the 1960s, when Mary and Linda worked at a nuclear power plant, Linda was known for her impeccable fashion sense, and Mary was often surprised by how she maintained her figure despite enjoying food. During their regular meetings at work and outings, the two women formed a strong bond, sharing everything about their lives. Mary admired Linda's exceptional taste as she skillfully matched outfits, shoes, bags, and accessories. Mary and Linda shared a passion for fashion and beauty. They were also ambitious, career-focused individuals determined to succeed in their respective fields. Linda advanced quickly in her career. She started as a secretary and eventually became a manager with her own office. Linda had been married twice, but had ended both marriages. Afterward, she began a long-term relationship with an insurance agent named Bill Sandretto. They dated for over 8 years, but they never chose to get married. Primarily because Bill valued his independence, Linda and Bill went through multiple breakups during this time, but they always reconciled since the 1980s. Linda has become the head of the department and started earning a good income. Linda was enthusiastic about spending money, but she made an effort to avoid impulsive purchases. She managed her budget well and planned to make several major purchases. In addition to maintaining her fashionable appearance, she bought a car and a spacious house in San Clemente, California. This house was the dream home she had envisioned for many years. Finally, she was able to buy it for herself, marking a significant milestone that confirmed her success. This achievement filled Linda with pride. In early 1989, Around the time of Linda's 45th birthday, her relationship with Bill came to an end. Paul, a consulting engineer hired at her company, frequently encountered her. He had a background in nuclear engineering and was a young professional with experience in power plant safety organization. However, he was seen as somewhat eccentric and quickly earned a reputation for being selfish and arrogant. His behavior was often deemed unacceptable, and he used his intelligence as an excuse for it. While Paul was indeed intellectually gifted and outperformed many of his colleagues based on his achievements, he also claimed to have won $26 in the lottery on his first try, which he attributed to careful calculation. Additionally, he belonged to an international community of high IQ individuals and often showcased his certificates. However, aside from that, he lacked any notable accomplishments. Paul was intelligent and charming, which impressed his boss, Linda, who quickly fell in love with him after 3 years of dating. They decided to marry. Fulfilling a long-held dream of Linda's, Linda often described their relationship as very loving, which seemed to justify her choice, even though she later confided to friends that there was no intimacy between them, as Paul showed little interest. Shortly after their marriage, Paul suggested they merge their finances. Linda contributed most of the income to their household, although they had plenty of money initially. Linda soon realized that her salary was not enough to cover their expenses. Despite her careful budgeting in the past, she found it increasingly difficult to save, and her funds were nearly depleted each month before her next paycheck. When she investigated the issue, she discovered that Paul had been using their joint finances to support 2 ex-wives and 3 children, whom Linda had not known about before their marriage. He dismissed this as a minor deception, and unfortunately, Linda believed him. This revelation surprised her friends, as she had always been financially responsible. As their marriage continued, Paul displayed increasingly suspicious behavior, leading to repeated concerning incidents, along with the story of the insurance contract. This raised red flags since he entered the marriage without any assets. While Linda owned a large mansion, multiple cars, and had invested in designer renovations, she still dressed elegantly and had a taste for expensive items, none of which Paul possessed. Paul must have known that his wife already had several life insurance policies in place, but he was not listed as a beneficiary on any of them. Her sister, ex-boyfriend, and other close relatives were. Instead, there seems to be no good reason for a new insurance policy. Many suspect that his motives were driven by a desire to gain financially in the event of her death, and many began to seriously fear that he would not just wait for such events, but might somehow expedite the process. Just 6 months into their marriage, Linda began to doubt her husband's true intentions. Around this time, her friend Frankie Thurber went through a divorce and found herself in a tough situation. In 1993, Linda offered Frankie a temporary place to stay in her mansion. Influenced by Frankie's experiences, Linda started to question whether her husband genuinely loved her, thinking he was trying to exploit their relationship. As a result, she asked Frankie not only to stay with her, but also to keep an eye on Paul and report any suspicious behavior. Even Frankie noticed that Paul had strong feelings for Linda, which showed in his actions. Although Paul wasn't wealthy and couldn't shower her with gifts, he expressed his love by taking care of her. He would cook delicious meals and pamper her with treats when she came home from work, followed by running a hot, foamy bath for her. This daily ritual became Linda's favorite. Observing this, and after listening to Frankie, even Mary eventually agreed that Paul seemed to be a loving husband, dedicated to making his wife happy. In June 1993, just before their first wedding anniversary, Linda's health began to decline. She experienced a mysterious illness, feeling persistently unwell without any typical symptoms of common ailments, like a cold. Instead, she suffered from ongoing stomach issues. Her condition worsened rapidly, and within a few days, she was hospitalized. By then, Linda was unable to get out of bed, shocking everyone around her, including her doctors. as she was once a healthy and vibrant 45-year-old woman, despite extensive examinations. The cause of her illness remained undetermined. In early July 1993, Linda was admitted to a hospital in Samaritan due to gastrointestinal problems. She was given a private room and assigned a qualified nurse for her care. Paul, her husband, stayed by her side and did everything he could to support her. 2 days after the admission, the nurse connected Linda to an IV for hydration and briefly left to attend to another patient. When the nurse returned, she noticed something alarming. The saline bag appeared unusually dark. The fluid looked cloudy and slightly yellowish, suggesting that something might have been added to it. The nurse quickly disconnected Linda from the IV, took the bag for lab analysis, and reported her findings to the hospital management. On that day, Linda received a visit from her ex-boyfriend, Bill, who was shocked by her frail appearance. Linda looked emaciated, as if she was struggling to survive. Within a week, she decided to go home, despite having difficulty walking, and was discharged from the hospital. However, her happiness was short-lived. Just 21 days later, she was readmitted due to a stroke. Linda nearly died, but was saved at the hospital. Subsequently, an analysis of her IV bag revealed a dangerously high dose of the painkiller lidocaine, which should not have been present for intravenous use. The medical center's management contacted the police, prompting an investigation that focused on one suspect, Paul, who was accused of attempting to poison his wife. Despite these alarming developments, Linda maintained that she loved Paul and had no plans to leave him. Did she realize that he might be the poisoner? It's possible that she simply pushed such thoughts away and didn't want to believe them. Meanwhile, her friends and family rallied against Paul, urging Linda to end the relationship for her safety. Nevertheless, she chose to stay with him. Linda eventually recovered from her mysterious illness, but the investigation into the poisoning stalled without any conclusions. Just 5 months later, in December 1993, Linda fell ill again with the same mysterious illness that doctors could not diagnose. Paul took her to a different hospital in Mission Viejo, where no one knew him, although he expressed distrust in the local specialists. The doctors there largely repeated the same diagnoses and conclusions as before. It appeared that Linda was being poisoned slowly. The medical staff also began to suspect her husband, who was always nearby. A nurse was assigned to monitor and care for Linda. She secretly communicated with Linda and warned her that her husband might have ulterior motives. A few days later, a similar incident occurred to one that had happened 5 months earlier. The nurse had briefly stepped out, leaving Paul alone with Linda. When the nurse returned, Paul was missing, and the IV drip bag looked different. It was later analyzed and found to be contaminated with unknown substances. The medical staff was already suspicious of Paul, believing he might be involved in an attempt to harm Linda to ensure her safety. They even placed a warning sign at the entrance of her room, with the content prohibiting Paul Curry from entering without an escort. The police were called back to Linda's room, where she explained that Paul had significant credit card debts, yet she insisted he was a wonderful, devoted, and loving husband. She maintained that he was very kind and could never harm her. It was possible that both medical institutions had misjudged the situation. When investigators interviewed Paul, he insisted that he had no idea what was happening to his wife and was simply waiting for her recovery. However, case records revealed a troubling discovery during searches of their mansion. In Paul's room, on his dresser, were all the life insurance policies taken out on his wife. This raised suspicions after Linda was discharged from the hospital. She spoke with Frankie, who confirmed that she had not placed the documents there, which meant Paul had done it. There was no one else involved. It was evident that Paul aimed to profit from her death. Despite this, Linda did not believe he was capable of such a terrible act. Nearly 6 months later, on June 9, 1994, Mary received an email from Paul informing her that Linda was feeling worse than ever and that an ambulance had been called. He believed Linda was dying and urged Mary to come and support her later. Around midnight, Paul called 911, claiming he had awakened to find his wife not breathing. In subsequent conversations with Linda's family and the police, he maintained that he sensed something was wrong, saw that Linda was barely breathing, and tried to perform artificial respiration, but she did not respond, prompting him to call for emergency help. By the time Linda arrived at the hospital, she had already died. Paul appeared to be a heartbroken widower, crying on the shoulders of Linda's family and friends, while they all quietly suspected him of murder. During the autopsy, the forensic expert found an unusual mark behind Linda's right ear, which they believed might be a sign of a syringe injection. A toxicology report later showed that Linda had a lethal amount of nicotine in her blood. This was particularly puzzling since Linda had never smoked. How could nicotine have entered her system? Consequently, her death was ruled a murder. But authorities found no evidence linking Paul to the crime. There were no syringes or needles at the scene, and the IV bags from previous cases did not have Paul's fingerprints. Meanwhile, Paul attempted to claim $1 million in life insurance from his deceased wife because he had previously successfully convinced Linda to purchase a new policy. Soon after Linda's death, it was discovered that she had handwritten a note, leaving half of her estate to her sister. This infuriated Paul, who sought legal advice to claim the entire inheritance, but he was unsuccessful. Everything had to be divided. In the end, Paul Curry collected $419 from Linda's 2 life insurance policies and her retirement plan. It also came to light that all of Paul's educational and professional credentials were forged. Even the supposed International Organization of Intellectuals was a scam. He hadn't even graduated from college. As a result, he was fired from his job. Now, these incidents were decided to be viewed in a new light. In 2002, the former state prosecutor retired, and a new one took over, showing immediate interest in Linda's case. At the time of Linda's death, he was still in law school, but he had since become the district attorney and was eager to make a name for himself. He was particularly intrigued by the media used to store evidence from the mid-90s, especially the extensive analysis of microcassette analysis. All conversations with suspects and witnesses had been recorded, including an interview with Linda conducted shortly before her death while she was in the hospital in August 19, 1993. During the investigation, authorities believed Linda was a victim of poisoning and sought to identify any potentially dangerous individuals in her life who might want to harm her. Mary quickly named one suspect, Paul Curry. He had the most significant motive. He stood to gain $1 million from insurance and ownership of his wife's property. The new prosecutor investigated the background of Paul and found that his entire life was based on deception. A poison expert specializing in substances like nicotine was consulted for the case. He determined that the nicotine level in the victim's blood was 4 to 5 times higher than a lethal dose, which could not have resulted from smoking alone. Given the forensic expert's initial findings, it was concluded that Paul had administered a fatal injection discreetly behind Linda's ear. Death occurred approximately 20 to 30 minutes later, leaving no chance to save Linda. In addition to nicotine, significant amounts of a sedative and sleeping pill were detected in her blood. It appeared that he first sedated his wife to administer the lethal injection without raising suspicion. Adding the sleeping pill was easy for him since he often cooked for Linda and experimented with different sauces and spices. A neighbor testified that Paul went to the store for cigarettes that evening. However, it was clear that Linda could not have absorbed such a high dose of nicotine even if she had smoked 5 packs. The nicotine must have been injected. After losing his job, Paul relocated to Kansas, where he remarried and had a son. He initially worked as a used car salesman and did well, but later grew bored and switched to being a building inspector. During this time, he had never broken the law and seemed to be a good family man and a respected member of the community. On November 9, 2010, Sergeant Schull questioned Paul Curry under the pretense of questioning him. as a potential witness in an unrelated case. In reality, they aimed to discuss Linda's death. Paul, believing they were out-of-state police officers unfamiliar with him and his late wife, began talking freely when asked about his past relationships, without requesting any identification. To the officer's surprise, he shared a story that contradicted his earlier statements. This led to the decision to arrest Paul Curry for revealing too much information. 16 years after his wife's death, Paul was finally held accountable. Unfortunately, justice did not hurry, and he did not appear in court until September 2014. During this time, he had spent all that time in jail. Paul faced charges of premeditated murder, which, according to state law, could result in life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The defense attorney employed a typical strategy of denial, arguing that the prosecution lacked direct evidence connecting Paul to Linda's murder. The defense claimed that Linda had given herself a nicotine enema, supposedly based on someone's suggestion of this unusual treatment for her stomach pain. Meanwhile, the prosecution stated that a sedative was found in her blood. Noting that there was no prescription for it and that it wasn't provided by the hospital, they alleged that Paul had given his wife the drug to sedate her before the murder. The prosecution also claimed that Paul was the only person in Linda's life with a serious motive and had been alone with her for at least 6 hours prior to her death, clearly having done something to her, as there was no one else who could have done it. After both sides presented their arguments, the jury went into deliberation, which lasted a day and a half. As a result, Paul Curry was found guilty of first-degree murder with the intent to profit, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Paul never admitted his guilt, so the exact circumstances surrounding Linda's death remain a mystery.
In 1994, the discovery of 5 lifeless bodies inside a large house in New Zealand became one of the strangest and most expensive criminal cases the country had ever faced. David Bain was the eldest son and the only survivor of the incident. Shockingly, David was later charged with 5 counts of murder, accused of killing his entire family. He was only 22 years old at the time. But if you think that's where the story ends, think again. 19 years later, David walked free, and the reason why is astonishing. It's one of those cases that makes you question everything. Trust me, you'll want to grit your teeth and hang on until the very end. But before we dive into the shocking twists and turns, let's first take a closer look at the Bain family, the people at the heart of this chilling mystery. By all appearances, the Bain family seemed like a typical religious family. David Cullen Bain was born on March 27, 1972, the first child of Robin Bain and Margaret Bain. His parents had married 3 years earlier. In 1969, they were deeply rooted in their faith, hoping for a peaceful, close-knit family life. But life had other plans. When David was 2 years old, Robin felt called to be a missionary teacher, so the family moved far away from home. The Bains uprooted their lives and moved over 3,000 miles northwest to Papua New Guinea. It was a massive change, from the familiar streets of New Zealand to the tropical and often challenging environment of a remote island nation. Their family grew. David became the eldest of 4 siblings, with 2 sisters, Arawa and Laniette, born 3 and 4 years after him. A younger brother, Stephen, arriving 8 years later. In many ways, this should have been a time of joy and growth, but beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. While Robin threw himself into his missionary work, Margaret's spiritual path began to shift. She became fascinated by New Age spiritualism and the idea of channeling spirits, a stark contrast to the traditional religious values the family was raised with. Margaret became convinced that their family was under threat from dark, satanic forces and fiercely believed that they needed protection from these evil influences. This obsession caused stress and fear at home, creating a sense of discomfort that intensified as time passed. Additionally, Robin's enthusiasm for his missionary work started to fade after several years. The dream that had brought the family to Papua New Guinea began to lose its luster. By 1988, 14 years after their move, they returned to New Zealand. The family settled into a large house in Anderson's Bay, a quiet suburb on New Zealand's South Island. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but life at home was far from peaceful. In 1991, Robin took a job as the principal of a small rural school. On paper, this sounded promising: a stable job, a chance to rebuild a community. But things were deteriorating rapidly. By 1994, the marriage between Robin and Margaret was hanging by a thread. They argued constantly, daily fights that wore down the family's spirit. Margaret's bitterness toward Robin had deepened so much that she reportedly made chilling comments about wanting to kill him. The tension was strong, and they could feel it both emotionally and in the atmosphere of their home. Visitors described the Bain household as a pigsty. The once grand house had become run down and neglected. Broken windows, peeling paint, and clutter filled every corner. Unpleasant smells lingered in the air, a testament to the family's neglect and disarray. Robin was rarely there to help. During the week, he lived and slept in a caravan near the school, miles away from the chaos at home. On weekends, instead of joining the family inside, he stayed in another caravan parked in the garden. The emotional distance between the family members only grew wider. Worse, dark rumors swirled around Robin. There were whispers and accusations of abuse towards his youngest daughter, and yet these claims cast a shadow over the family and would later become a key element in the case that shocked the nation. On the other hand, David's relationship with his father was tense and strained. In contrast, he was very close to his mother, Margaret, and they often shared grievances about Robin, united in their frustrations. At 22 years old in 1994, David was trying to find his way. He was a music student with dreams of becoming an opera singer, an ambitious goal that set him apart from the typical path his siblings were on. Whether or not he had the talent for international fame is up for debate, but David's passion for music was real. Now, despite the turmoil at home, all 4 Bain children were involved in school or work. Arawa was training to be a teacher, Stephen was finishing high school, and Laniet held a part-time job. However, David's path was a little more complicated. After struggling to fit in at university, he had dropped out for a time and even relied on unemployment benefits. But he eventually returned to university to study classical music, supporting himself by delivering newspapers in the early mornings, a humble job that required discipline and grit. By 1994, the bond between Robin and Margaret was not just broken, it was shattered beyond repair. Margaret had become really convinced that Robin was possessed by a demon she called Balil. She also referred to her husband as a son of Balil, one of the 4 crowned princes of hell. This wasn't some passing thought or simple fear, it was something she wrote about repeatedly in her diary, describing how she believed her husband was under the control of an evil spirit, that it cast a dark shadow over their home and tore the family apart. Margaret's attempts to rid Robin of this demon often took the form of exorcisms, rituals meant to drive the evil out. Robin's mental health suffered immensely under this strain. Colleagues at his school described him as a man who was depressed, withdrawn, and barely functioning, like a shell of the person he once was. Neglecting his own hygiene and appearing almost robotic, Robin seemed lost, trapped in a life that was falling apart around him. Meanwhile, the children found themselves caught in the middle of this toxic environment. David, Arawa, Laniet, and Stephen each had their own complicated relationships with their parents and with each other. Some children sided more with their mother, others were closer to their father. The house, already cluttered and chaotic, was filled with tension and emotional pain. It was clear that the family was on the brink of collapse. And then, on the morning of Monday, June 20th, 1994, the unimaginable happened. At exactly 7:09 in the morning, David Bain made a frantic call to emergency services. All dead. They're all dead. I can't believe they're all dead. David trying to explain what he had found in his own home. When police arrived, they were confronted with a scene so grim and tragic that it was almost unimaginable. David's mother, sisters, and youngest brother were all dead. His father lay in the lounge, a bullet wound to the head. The family rifle was on the floor beside him, and chillingly, a typed message on the computer read, "Sorry, you are the only one who deserves to stay." The family home was a mess, as usual, but now it was stained with loss and violence. All 5 members of the Bain family were dead, victims of a brutal shooting that shocked the entire nation. The question everyone wanted answered was, who did this and why? In the days following the massacre, more evidence emerged that suggested Robin, the father, might have been innocent after all. Remarkably, the only blood found on him was his own. There was none on his clothes, socks, or shoes, which he had been wearing that day. This was puzzling because if Robin had been the killer and had then shot himself, one would expect at least some transfer of blood to his clothing or hands. Moreover, Robin's fingerprints were completely absent from the rifle found beside him, a fact that forensic experts found hard to reconcile. If Robin had fired the fatal shots and then turned the weapon on himself, his fingerprints should have been all over the gun. To complicate matters further, no gunpowder residue was detected on his hands, a forensic detail that contradicted the idea of him taking his own life. The initial theory seemed clear. The father, Robin, had killed his family before taking his own life. But this explanation quickly began to unravel. Forensic experts examined the bullet wound in Robin's head and declared it nearly impossible that he had shot himself. The trajectory and angle of the bullet, along with the blood patterns, suggested his body had been moved after death, casting doubt on the father theory. This twist in the investigation shifted suspicion towards David Bain. If Robin wasn't the killer, then why was David alive when everyone else in his family was dead? Why had he been spared to add to the growing mystery? David's story just didn't quite add up. When officers first questioned him, he explained that he had completed his usual newspaper round between 6 and 6:42 in the morning. This timeline seemed straightforward enough, and a neighbor even confirmed to police that they saw David entering the Bain property at around 6:40 a.m. But here's where things get strange. David didn't call for help until 7:09 a.m., a full 24 minutes after he supposedly returned home. What happened during that gap? When interrogated, David admitted he zoned out, unsure of what to do or how to react to the horror inside his own house. This delay immediately raised red flags for investigators, who wondered if something was being left out of his story. Adding more complexity to the case, David was unable to explain the fresh injuries on his forehead and knees. These wounds suggested some kind of recent struggle or accident, but he had no clear explanation. Even more incriminating was the fact that the gun found next to Robin's body actually belonged to David. He further admitted he was the only person who knew where the key to unlock the gun's safety mechanism was kept, making him the prime suspect in the eyes of the police. With this mounting suspicion, it didn't take long for the authorities to detain David. Merely 4 days after the horrific massacre, he was arrested and charged with the murders of his entire family. Digital forensics played a crucial role in unraveling the tangled timeline of that tragic morning. It was discovered that the computer on which the final letter was typed had been switched on at 6:44 a.m., just 2 minutes after David reportedly arrived home. This suggested that the note had been composed shortly after his return, seemingly placing him at the scene during the time of the killings. Despite all the mounting evidence casting doubt on Robin's guilt, the investigation took a dark turn just 17 days after the murders. The Bain family's relatives, deeply unsettled by the gruesome scene, decided to take drastic action. Relatives, worried about teenagers breaking in and accidentally causing a fire or other problems, asked for the house to be deliberately burned down in a safe, controlled manner. The decision was approved by David himself, who agreed to this controversial move. While it might seem illogical to burn down a crime scene, the family and authorities wanted to prevent further tragedy or vandalism. Within minutes, the old wooden Bain family home was engulfed in roaring flames. The blaze quickly consumed the house, erasing the physical space where such a horrific tragedy had unfolded. The house was consumed by towering flames for more than an hour. The fire could be seen over most of the city. It burned 17 days after Arawa, Laniette, and Stephen were killed, along with parents Robin and Margaret. Still, with the house now reduced to ashes, the investigators could only rely on the evidence they had already gathered. No further forensic work could be done on the physical crime scene, as it no longer existed. How the family managed to get permission to burn down a crime scene so fast, or why anyone even thought it was a good idea, remains a total mystery. Despite all this, the wheels of justice kept turning. Almost 1 year to the day after the massacre, in May of 1995, David's trial finally began. Prosecutors came well prepared and carefully reconstructed a timeline of the horrific morning. According to their version, David woke at 5 a.m. to the familiar buzz of his alarm clock. After dressing, he put on a pair of white opera gloves, a strange and unsettling choice, and retrieved his rifle. Along with the ammunition from his wardrobe, using a spare key, he unlocked the gun's trigger lock, effectively readying himself for what would become a brutal and bloody spree. David systematically shot his mother, then his 2 sisters, and finally his younger brother. During a violent struggle with his brother Stephen, David lost a lens from his glasses and suffered several injuries himself. Blood from the victims soaked into David's clothes, a damning detail prosecutors emphasized to prove his involvement. Trying to cover his tracks, David supposedly threw the bloodied clothes into the washing machine, started a cycle, took a shower, and changed into fresh, clean clothes. These actions explain the pools of blood found scattered throughout the laundry room and bathroom, places no one would expect unless someone was desperately trying to erase evidence. After this cleanup, David reportedly went about his usual morning routine, leaving the house at 5:45 a.m. to deliver newspapers as if nothing was wrong. Upon returning home at approximately 6:42 a.m., he went upstairs and switched on the computer at 6:44 a.m., then typed a message. Then he waited for his father, Robin, to return. Robin was known to enter the house from his caravan at exactly 7 a.m. every morning to pray, and tragically, that day was no different. Prosecutors argued that David hid behind a curtain in the lounge, silently waiting for Robin to nearby. At that precise moment, he shot his father at point-blank range. Only then did he make the call to emergency services, feigning shock and despair. This call coincided with the 24-minute gap. David claimed he had zoned out, unsure of what to do next. Afterward, David allegedly staged the scene to make it look like Robin had taken his own life. But David tells a completely different story. He told the court that he had gotten up at his usual time, prepared for his paper route, and left the house with his dog. Upon returning around 6:42 a.m., he went straight to his room, took off his shoes, and went downstairs to wash his hands. While he admitted putting his clothes into the washing machine, he denied they had any blood on them. Heading back upstairs, he claimed he noticed bullets and the rifle's trigger lock lying on the floor. Frantically, he searched the house and found his mother, sisters, and brother all dead in their bedrooms. His father was also dead, lying in the lounge. According to David, he then zoned out for about 20 minutes before finally calling emergency services. Additionally, David's defense team proposed a shocking alternative, that Robin, the father, was actually the killer. According to their theory, Robin had killed his family before turning on the computer to type a message and then had taken his own life. It was a bold claim, but several parts of David's story just didn't add up. The prosecution, meanwhile, argued that David's motive was financial. They claimed he wanted to inherit the family fortune. His parents had put away a large sum of money intended for a new house. When the trial ended, David Bain was found guilty on all 5 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 16 years. Now, you might think the story ends there. A horrific family massacre, an obvious suspect, and a clear sentence. Case closed, but you'd be wrong. Over the months and years that followed, David Bain's case captivated many. news of the Bain family massacre spread like wildfire across the nation, and public opinion was sharply divided on who was truly to blame. One of David's most vocal supporters was Joe Karam, a former All-Black rugby star. After retiring from professional sports, Joe developed a deep interest in the case during his more relaxed years. Convinced of David's innocence, Joe became an outspoken advocate. Following David's sentencing, Joe visited him over 200 times in prison. He even wrote 4 books about the case, tirelessly researching and pressuring the justice system for a review. His efforts eventually led to a major breakthrough, an appeal to the Privy Council. This appeal, which began in May 2007, 12 years after David's initial imprisonment, was a monumental moment. The Privy Council, based in London, found that a serious miscarriage of justice had occurred. They ordered David's convictions to be quashed and scheduled a new trial. The council argued there was significant doubt David would have been convicted if crucial evidence, discovered after the original trial, had been presented to the jury. Much of this new evidence was information the jury had never even heard. For example, Dean Cottle, a friend of Laniet, revealed something explosive. According to Dean, Laniet had confided in him about an incestuous relationship with her father, Robin. Just days before the massacre, she had traveled home to confront the family with this horrific secret. This testimony suggested a possible motive for Robin, but the judge, in the original trial, ruled Dean's evidence as hearsay and labeled him an unreliable witness. As a result, this crucial information was suppressed and never reached the jury. As time passed, even more disturbing facts came to light. Robin had reportedly published brutal and sadistic stories written by his pupils in a school newsletter. One of these stories even involved a fictional family massacre. A 46-page document detailed the many wrongdoings of the first trial, painting a clear picture of its inherent unfairness. None of this information was available to the jury in 1995, meaning David's defense team couldn't properly shift suspicion towards Robin. Consequently, David was granted bail and allowed to remain out of prison while awaiting the new trial. This brief taste of freedom, after spending over a decade behind bars, must have felt almost surreal. For 3 months, he lived with Joe Karam and then moved to Auckland. This fleeting liberty was likely a bittersweet experience, shadowed by the heavy knowledge that his nightmare was far from over. 2 years later, in March 2009, David's retrial commenced, forcing him and everyone connected to the case to relive the horrors once again. David pleaded not guilty to the 5 murder charges. Again, his defense argued that Robin, the father, was the true killer who had then turned the gun on himself. This time, however, the defense brought forward far more compelling evidence, suggesting why Robin might have committed such a chilling act. They detailed Robin's descent into a deep and morbid depression, his alarming behavior that concerned colleagues and friends, and most importantly, they uncovered the secret at the heart of it all, Laniet's dark and hidden truth, which she was allegedly ready to reveal to the family just before the massacre. This secret, steeped in horror and despair, painted a picture of a man pushed to the edge by desperation and shame. The retrial dragged on for 3 grueling months, filled with testimony, arguments, and re-examinations of every detail. Yet, despite the lengthy process, the jury's decision was astonishingly swift. Less than a day after deliberation, they returned with a unanimous verdict of not guilty. After spending 13 years in prison and 2 additional years under legal suspicion, David Bain was finally free. Since then, he has lived outside the prison walls, rebuilding his life piece by piece. However, the case continues to divide opinions sharply. There are still many details that make it hard for some to accept David's innocence. His bloody fingerprints were found on the murder weapon. Fresh injuries appeared on his body with no explanation, and Stephen's blood was discovered on clothes David had washed and denied having stained. What about the mysterious 20 minutes David claimed to have zoned out for? How does one explain that lapse during such a horrific day? More tellingly, experts have widely agreed that the angle of Robin's fatal wound made it almost impossible for him to have taken his own life. So, if Robin didn't kill himself, then who was responsible? Adding to the suspicion is the fact that David gave permission to burn down the family home, the very scene of the murders. To many, that act alone speaks volumes. Even David's girlfriend at the time said he had a premonition something terrible was about to happen shortly before the killings, which seems too coincidental to ignore. Yet, on the flip side, there are equally convincing reasons to believe Robin might have been the true culprit. Robin was reportedly deeply unhappy with his life, and if Laniette's secret was true, he could have been overwhelmed with panic and fear. Shell casings were found in his caravan, and the disturbing, sadistic stories revealed by his colleagues painted the portrait of a man unraveling mentally and emotionally. This case remains one of New Zealand's most polarizing, sparking intense debate over who truly committed the murders. The financial cost of this case was staggering. Taxpayers shelled out over $7 million, with the retrial alone costing more than $4 million, making it the most expensive trial in New Zealand's history. Joe Karam, David's unwavering advocate, lost over $500,000 personally supporting the cause. David himself sought compensation for his wrongful imprisonment. Given the high-profile nature of the case, New Zealand's Justice Minister brought in overseas judges to review the application. The review recommended compensation, but bureaucratic delays meant that the case was handed back and forth between ministers. 6 long years of red tape and delays passed before David was finally awarded $925,000 in 2016. During all this turmoil, David rebuilt his life. He found work as an engineer, fell in love, married, had a child, and legally changed his name. Rumor has it that the family eventually moved to Australia, perhaps to escape the long shadow cast by the case. As for the Bain family home, no trace remains of the original property that was burned down in 1994. The site has since been completely transformed into a landscaped, modern 3-bedroom house, erasing the physical memory of what happened there. Over the decades, the story of the Bain family massacre and all its related evidence has faded into the distant past, becoming almost like a dark legend whispered about but rarely confronted. In some countries, strict control is a deeply ingrained part of the culture and customs. This can conflict with the values commonly held in Western societies. Even after moving to a new country, some people find it hard to adjust to greater personal freedoms. Holding too tightly to these traditional beliefs can sometimes lead to serious problems. Aziz Yazdanpana was born in Iran on May 29, 1955. Even as a young man, he was known for being strict and tough, yet those close to him also saw his softer side. His stern father instilled in him a deep respect for family, a sense of duty, and a strong sense of responsibility, values that Aziz strived to uphold. He was devoted to his family and longed to have one of his own. In his youth in Iran, he met the love of his life, Nasrin Rahmati, who was born on February 4, 1956. After dating for a while, they married, marking a new chapter in both their lives. Together, they decided to make a radical change and start anew in the United States of America. They successfully immigrated and settled in Grapevine, Texas, a small, pleasant town. Later, Nasrin's sister and her husband joined them in the U.S. There, the family continued to build their lives, raising 2 children. At the time of the events in question, their daughter, Nona Yazdanpana, was 19, and their son, Ali Yazdanpana, was 14. Upon arriving in the U.S., Nasrin became a homemaker, dedicating her time to raising their children and managing the household. This was the traditional family structure common in Iran. Aziz was the breadwinner, focusing on a career in real estate. Initially, they had enough money, but with the addition of new family members, their circumstances changed, and they had to become more frugal. Although Aziz didn't outwardly appear strict and authoritarian, this became apparent to those who knew them well. This dynamic reflected the cultural influence of their upbringing. To the outside world, they seemed like a typical family pursuing the American dream. However, Nasrin couldn't help but notice the greater freedoms afforded to women in America compared to Iran. She desired more independence, but Aziz staunchly opposed it, clinging to traditional gender roles. Beneath the facade of an ideal family, problems began to mount. Soon, Aziz faced a series of setbacks. They had purchased a large family home, and as the children grew, their expenses increased. Furthermore, Aziz's ambitions exceeded their financial means, and he struggled to achieve the level of income he desired. Nasrin offered support, but Aziz grew increasingly discontented. A significant blow came in 1996 when Aziz was convicted of tax evasion and ordered to pay a $30,000 fine. He was also placed on probation for 3 years, further straining the family's already limited resources and threatening the loss of their home. Nasrin wanted to contribute to managing the budget and suggested solutions, such as downsizing to a more affordable house. However, Aziz refused to allow her to make important decisions, seemingly acting in opposition to her suggestions. He believed he could resolve their financial problems on his own and elevate their situation. Nasrin attempted to become more involved in the family's life, including financial matters, and suggested ways she could help, pointing to the common practice of American women earning incomes on par with their husbands. However, Aziz considered even the suggestion an insult. He insisted that his wife remain a housewife, responsible only for the children and household chores. This situation persisted for several years. By 1999, their financial situation had reached another low point, leading them to consider filing for bankruptcy. However, the case was quickly dismissed. As the children grew up, their needs increased, requiring new clothes and school supplies. Aziz began to accuse Nasrin and the children of overspending. Despite their modest lifestyle, his attempts to improve their financial situation continued to fail. The situation worsened in 2007 when Aziz lost his job, depriving the family of their only source of income. Despite everything, Aziz continued to insist that Nasrin not work. However, she could no longer remain idle. She had taken courses and obtained a cosmetology license and wanted to work in a beauty salon, perhaps even starting her own business. This would significantly contribute to the family's budget. Aziz ignored her pleas, clinging to his conservative beliefs. He had never adapted to the American way of life, where women could hold equal positions with men, and refused to consider deviating from his traditional views. Finally, when her husband lost his job and could not find another, Nasrin decided to take matters into her own hands. Disobeying her husband was out of character, but she saw no other way to save her family from financial ruin. She was completely disappointed in him and realized he had no chance of fitting into the American format. Ignoring his prohibitions, Nasrin found a job, managing to work at 2 beauty salons simultaneously. This initially allowed her to somewhat stabilize the situation, but Aziz was going through a terrible emotional period and made rash decisions. He felt he had lost his manhood, not only because he lost his job, but also because he could not support his family. He became jealous of Nasrin's success and, in an attempt to assert his dominance, declared he would refuse to work at all if she continued to work like a man. He repeatedly confessed to family friends that all this had severely damaged his self-esteem. The roles in the family had now completely reversed. Nasrin began working with enthusiasm, hoping her husband's resentment would soon pass and they could build a prosperous future together. But instead of actively seeking income, Aziz ignored the needs of his loved ones. He simply stopped showing any initiative and didn't even look for work. Aziz didn't give up easily, but his pride was deeply wounded by his wife's actions. According to a friend of Nasrin, the tension in the marriage had increased significantly. The owner of the beauty salon where Nasrin worked saw her hard work and the problems the family was struggling with, even with the strained relationship with her husband. Nasrin still hoped they could save their marriage and overcome their financial difficulties. She often spoke of her dreams in which Aziz would find a job and stop being angry with her. However, friends and neighbors noticed that the atmosphere in the house was becoming increasingly tense. Aziz's attempt to teach her a lesson had backfired. To his surprise, his wife was able to bear the financial burden, providing for him and their 2 children. It was difficult, but she managed. Instead of being happy for her, he harbored resentment and anger, which manifested in cruel ways. She maintained stability for a while. However, once the children grew up, their needs increased again, and their daughter needed money for her education, putting a strain on their finances. Aziz continued to mock her. He was so determined to teach his wife a lesson that he didn't understand the consequences of his actions. Even the children began to get angry with him. Nona and Ali were old enough to see and understand what was happening. However, his strict control did not weaken, so they did not have much freedom. Conflicts in the family home became regular. If earlier, Aziz had provoked them by blaming everyone for their failures, now the others confronted him directly. After 24 years of marriage, Nasrin stopped trying to encourage Aziz. She finally realized that he was not going to participate in solving their problems, but would continue to make them worse. By April 2011, Nasrin had decided to separate from Aziz. She and her children left their spacious family home, choosing a more modest living arrangement to avoid complete financial ruin. They moved from a 2-story house of 280 square meters to a 3-room apartment, providing minimal amenities for their son and daughter. The priority was not comfort or size, but freedom from her husband, who was a burden, and increased tension within the family. They ended up about 3 kilometers from their old residence. Nasrin took out a mortgage on the apartment and planned to continue paying for it herself. Remarkably, even in this situation, she didn't want to cause a scene and simply moved quietly, without unnecessary conflict. Even the neighbors didn't immediately realize what had happened, as it was all done so calmly. They were more struck by the sudden silence, the absence of arguments in the house. Only then did some realize Nasrin and Aziz had separated. Only the closest neighbors knew the truth. Several months passed. Nasrin continued to work and felt a significant sense of relief after leaving her husband. The atmosphere in the family became much calmer and warmer. Despite financial constraints, the burden felt much lighter than when she was living with Aziz. Nasrin spent a lot of time with her family and friends. In her opinion, reconciliation with her husband was completely out of the question. From the outside, Aziz's condition seemed to have improved, but it was just an act. One Friday in March, they were seen together again. This happened a few months after the breakup. That day, Aziz and Nasrin participated in a joint garage sale, but they didn't seem as friendly and happy as before. Many noticed the tension, but Aziz avoided conflict. He tried to appear to be a good person, even attending his children's sports competition. However, Nasrin understood perfectly well that this was just a facade. She had already filed for divorce and was waiting for it to be finalized. Everyone thought that the separation was beneficial for Nasrin. Nasrin continued to work hard, and her daughter, Nona, contributed to the family income. Without her father's oppressive presence, Nona was able to help realize their dream of simplifying their life in the US. Just like her mother, the family began to cope much better. Nona earned her high school diploma and then went to college. With the improved atmosphere at home, she could focus on more than just solving problems. She began to pursue her own ambitions. She wanted to go to the University of California to study law. If she could become a lawyer and start a private practice, it could be the beginning of a better life for her. However, not everyone was so optimistic about the future. Close friends knew that Nona was actually going through a difficult time. Behind the facade of progress and apparent resilience, there was a deep inner struggle. Back in August 2011, she confessed to her best friends that she was dealing with some serious issues that were only getting worse. However, no one could get her to reveal any details. For Aziz, the situation continued to deteriorate. He tried in every way to demonstrate that he was ready to continue the relationship, but Nasrin and the children were indifferent. During their separation, Nasrin only became more convinced that she was moving in the right direction and that life would be easier, more comfortable, alone. All this fueled Aziz's anger. He was still trying to repair the relationship, but deep down, he had long understood that it was impossible. Each meeting with Nasreen, where she shared her successes, only increased his resentment. All this anger accumulated, and it was bound to explode eventually. After a year of shocks, separations, and conflicts, on December 25, 2011, Nasreen decided to throw a festive Christmas party at her house, intended to gather all family members and mark the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Everyone who knew Nasreen and the children well was invited, except for Aziz. No one wanted him to come and ruin the mood. As he usually did, Nasreen wanted to celebrate with her children, so she invited her sister, Zohra Rahmati, 58, her husband, Mohammad Hossein Zari, 59, and their daughter, Sahra Zari, 22. Unfortunately, Aziz learned about the planned Christmas party. He was furious that he wasn't invited. Despite all the pain and insults he had inflicted on his family, he believed he had a right to attend the event, and he harbored malicious intentions. At the very beginning of the holiday, around 11 a.m., there was a knock at Nasreen's door. When she opened it, she saw a man dressed as Santa Claus. Nasreen immediately recognized him as Aziz. Obviously, no one had invited him. He could ruin the family holiday, and she desperately wanted to prevent that. Aziz behaved very friendly, trying to convince her that he only wanted to surprise the children. After a short discussion, Nasreen reluctantly agreed to let him in. As soon as Aziz entered, the atmosphere became tense. Everyone, even Sarah, felt the unease. No one wanted him there. They hoped he would leave soon after offering his greetings. Sarah was texting her friends. Around 11 a.m., she wrote that Uncle Aziz showed up at a party he wasn't invited to, dressed as Santa Claus, to ruin everything. She sarcastically added that Aziz now wanted to win the Father of the Year award. The text was full of biting remarks, as she knew how much the man had damaged the lives of her aunt and aunt's children. At 11:15, Sahra sent another message. According to her, Aziz had already started to provoke another argument. Then, the girl fell silent forever. At 11:34, a call came into the 911 emergency service. The operator could barely hear a whisper on the other end of the line. The caller was begging for rescue. After a few short phrases, the call was disconnected. No information was provided, but it was clear that something terrible had happened. The operator quickly identified the location from which the call was made, and a police patrol was dispatched to the address to investigate. The officers arrived within 3 minutes, but no one answered the door. Given the alarming circumstances of the call, they decided to force entry. Inside, the officers found a horrifying scene: a festive table laden with food and drink, unopened gifts, and the bodies of 7 people. None had survived. The victims were identified as 55-year-old Nasreen, 56-year-old Aziz, their children, 19-year-old Nona, and 14-year-old Ali. Nasreen's sister, 58-year-old Zohra, her husband, 59-year-old Muhammad, and their daughter, 22-year-old Sarah. The entire family, along with their guests, had been shot. The television was on, and one of the victims was still dressed in pajamas. The children and teenagers had been shot in the head. Muhammad had sustained the most gunshot wounds, including shots to the head, chest, and stomach, suggesting he had tried to escape. Nasreen and Aziz were both shot in the head. The victims' autopsies revealed that everyone except Muhammad had been shot with the same 9mm weapon. Muhammad was found with a 9mm firearm in his hand. A second man, dressed as Santa Claus, Aziz, was also found with a firearm in hand. It remained unclear whether he was the attacker or if he had been trying to defend himself. Aziz and Muhammad were initially considered suspects. To clarify the situation, detectives began tracing the firearms. All evidence was collected and sent for ballistic analysis. The public was shocked by the murders and demanded quick answers from the police. Detectives initially believed that the attacker was among the dead, and no longer posed a threat. The first major breakthrough came the day after the tragedy, on December 26, 2011. The 9mm pistol was traced back to a 1996 purchase registered to Aziz. Ballistic analysis confirmed that it was used to kill 5 of the victims. Significant gunpowder residue was found on Aziz's hands, indicating he had fired the weapon extensively. Minimal gunpowder residue was found on Mohammed's hands, suggesting he had not fired a weapon actively. Experts suggested he may have only fired once. The investigation was further aided by interviews with neighbors and a review of surveillance footage in the area. The footage showed that after the man dressed as Santa Claus entered the house, no one left. It appeared that Aziz had tried to cover his tracks. After shooting his relatives, he attempted to frame Mohammed by placing the 9mm pistol in his hand after his death. The weapon had been carefully cleaned and all fingerprints removed. There wasn't even a trace of Mohammed's fingerprints on the gun, which was impossible. Aziz fired 2 shots from a .40 caliber pistol. The first struck Mohammed, and the second he directed into his own head. Long, standing animosity between the family members, coupled with the news that Aziz was unwelcome at the gathering, may have been the final catalyst for his actions. However, the fact that he deliberately came to the house armed suggests that he had planned the crime in advance. This wasn't an act of spontaneous aggression, but seemingly a premeditated, first-degree murder of his entire family. Aziz took great pains to establish a reliable alibi, a fact that initially confused the investigation. Yet, for reasons unknown, he changed his mind and chose to end his life alongside his loved ones. He likely realized the magnitude of his crime and felt he could not live with the consequences. In total, 7 people died in this bloody tragedy. The scale of the devastation shocked not only those familiar with the Aziz family, but the entire local community. Another important piece of evidence is mobile phone data of Sarah. Detectives became interested in messages she had sent to her friends. Only 20 minutes elapsed between the start of the attack and the deaths of 7 people. The exact trigger that prompted Aziz to commit such violence remained unclear. During the investigation, various theories emerged, ranging from the obvious anger Aziz felt towards his wife and family to his potential mental state. Many experts in the field of psychiatry weighed in on the issue. Aziz appeared to be a man sinking into a deep depression, feeling that he was losing control of his life. His wife had filed for divorce a few months before the massacre, and his house was in a deplorable state. He faced foreclosure and had not secured stable, full-time employment leading up to the crime. While law enforcement officers struggled to piece together the puzzle, they uncovered the struggles of 19-year-old Nona. She had begun dating a friend and classmate, a relationship her father disapproved of. A conservative man, deeply rooted in the traditions of his native country, Aziz exerted total control over the lives of all his family members, including his daughter, often to the detriment of her emotional well-being. Nona's friends reported that she often came to school in tears, complaining that her father wouldn't allow her to wear the clothes she liked and regularly confiscated and checked her mobile phone, scrutinizing every message. According to his religious and cultural views, she was not allowed to leave the house until a certain age. Even after Nona reached that age, Aziz forbade her from communicating with anyone, especially boys and men. Nona's disobedience only worsened Aziz's state of mind. When the family still lived together in their old house, he installed surveillance cameras throughout the property, both inside and out. This allowed him to monitor everyone's movements, creating a situation resembling a developing obsession. He jealously guarded her, even sealing the window in her room to prevent her from secretly running away to see her girlfriend. Aziz frantically tried to maintain control, a control he had long since lost. When the disobedience reached a breaking point, everyone abandoned him. The head of the broken family simply decided to kill everyone. Further details of Aziz's relationships were revealed. He had been quite close to his brother-in-law, Mohammed. For a long time, the men shared a warm relationship and even went on trips together On one occasion, they cheated on their wives, renting hotel rooms and spending the night with escorts. After Nasreen filed for divorce, Aziz blamed everyone but himself, unable to accept his own imperfections. The killer became convinced that Muhammad had revealed his infidelity, poisoning Nasreen against him. From that moment on, the relationship between the men deteriorated significantly, and Aziz considered his brother-in-law a traitor. This explained why Aziz had decided to frame him by placing a weapon in the dead man's hand. Those who knew Nasreen well had heard much about her reasons for separating from Aziz. She cited his failures in upholding his cultural and religious obligations. Instead of providing for everyone, supporting his family, and creating a comfortable home, Aziz seemed to deliberately make their lives difficult, increasing the emotional distance between himself and his wife and children. He transformed their life and everyday existence into a nightmare, pushing them to the verge of complete ruin. Instead of accepting responsibility for his actions, Aziz tried to blame everyone around him. As it turned out, Nasreen's close friends had heard many times that she was afraid of her husband. She had stated this several months before filing for divorce, and after she moved out, the situation only worsened. She tried to avoid contact with him and did not allow him into the house. She prevented him from communicating with the children. Considering him dangerous, she ignored suggestions to report him to the police, hoping he would calm down on his own and not wanting to cause him further trouble. Neighbors had heard that Aziz had been carrying a gun for a long time. He completely ignored the traditions and laws of the country he had moved to. He claimed that he had acquired a firearm to protect his daughter from the unwanted attention of American men. On December 28, 2011, the entire Grapevine, Texas community gathered to honor the victims. This shooting is the deadliest crime ever committed in the city. Nasreen and the children were especially mourned. She was remembered as a devoted mother, an altruistic, generous woman who tried to escape the clutches of a tyrant, but paid for it with her life. The Christmas Day massacre of 2011 left Grapevine, Texas, forever scarred, its festive spirit tainted by an unimaginable act of violence. The loss of Nasreen Rahmati, her children, Nona and Ali, and their relatives Zohre Rahmati, Muhammad Hossein Zari, and Sahra Zari shattered a close-knit community known as the Christmas capital of Texas. Vigils at Parr Park and memorials at Colleyville Heritage High School honored their memory. The tragedy underscored the devastating consequences of unaddressed marital strife, financial ruin, and rigid cultural beliefs clashing with personal freedoms. It serves as a somber reminder to foster understanding and support for those struggling to adapt to new societal norms, lest such pain and loss repeat in silence.
It began as an ordinary evening. Patrick Sean Betts, an 11-year-old boy from Upland, San Bernardino, California, was at his favorite pizza place with his mom and sister. He was cheerful, laughing, and enjoying activities that many kids in the 80s loved. Patrick asked his mom for some change and went to play in the arcade at the back. Everything seemed normal until he walked out of the pizza place and never returned home. What truly happened that night? Why did it take so long for anyone to search for him? How did a case with so many puzzling details go unnoticed for such a long time? Patrick was born on June 21, 1976, to Dennis and Barbara Betts, who had lived in Upland for many years. He grew up in an environment full of love, enjoying skateboards, and a kind of freedom. Patrick attended Sierra Vista Elementary School, where his vibrant personality shone brightly despite his small stature. His mom, Barbara, described him as cheerful and easygoing, while his friends saw him as playful and street smart. He was polite, helpful, and naturally curious. He often spending time at the local Radio Shack. His humor was surprisingly mature for his age, making people laugh and keeping them wanting to be around him. One of the most important people in Patrick's life was his best friend Kevin Charlebois, who lived just across the street. Kevin has health problems that keep him homebound. Not many kids try to connect with him, but Patrick really cares and makes an effort to help his friend. The two became best friends, bonded by trust and kindness. Like many kids at that time, Patrick enjoyed video games, baseball, and skateboarding. His friendship with Kevin deepened his love for baseball, especially since Kevin's dad coached the local Little League team. Patrick couldn't sleep at night without his favorite blanket, which brought him comfort and a sense of security. Then came January 20th, 1988, a day that the Betts family would always remember. It started like any other day. Patrick, his mother Barbara, and his older sister Pamela were having dinner at Pizza Chalet, a popular family restaurant in Upland that had an arcade. As usual, Patrick rushed to the games after asking his mom for some quarters. He had recently made friends with the owner's son, and they spent hours playing together. Although Barbara didn't know this new friend very well, she felt comfortable letting Patrick go play. Later that evening, Patrick asked his mom if he could go to a basketball game at Upland High with a friend. Thinking it was nearby and trusting her son, Barbara agreed. As he left, he asked her to save him a slice of pizza. It was a typical, light-hearted request, a moment any parent would smile at, but it turned out to be the last time Barbara saw her son. The game was actually in Chino, nearly 8 miles away, a fact the boys were unaware of. Disappointed, they returned to Pizza Chalet and spent time at the arcade. Patrick was last seen around 9 p.m. playing video games there. After that, he said he was going home, but he never arrived. That night, his family waited anxiously, hoping he would walk in, perhaps a bit embarrassed for being late. But hours went by, and then the entire night passed. When morning came, it brought only worry that Patrick was missing. One would expect the local police to conduct a thorough investigation right away, but that didn't happen. Instead, Upland authorities quickly dismissed the situation, suggesting that Patrick had run away. They told his distraught family he would return when he got hungry. This idea seemed ridiculous to Barbara and Dennis. Yes, Patrick had been involved in a minor school issue shortly before he disappeared. He had a juvenile court date approaching, but he wasn't anxious about it. He had never stated any desire to run away, and his behavior didn't suggest he planned to. In fact, his favorite blanket, something he always needed at night, was still in his room, and his clothes and belongings were untouched. If Patrick had truly run away, wouldn't he have taken something with him? But investigators stuck to their runaway theory. There were no Amber Alerts, no immediate search efforts, and no sense of urgency. Upland was not the safest place, with a population of just over 48,000 and a crime rate slightly above the national average. On average, 5 serious crimes occurred daily, which raised concerns, especially with a child missing. The Betts family was determined to prevent their son from becoming just another missing person case. They began their own search, going door to door in Upland, distributing flyers and asking anyone who might have information. Their first stop was Pizza Chalet, the last place Patrick had been seen. They sought leads and eventually caught a break. A woman from a nearby beauty supply store recalled seeing Patrick enter with an older teenage boy. Initially, this seemed promising, but her memory became unclear. She wavered between being sure and unsure, at one point forgetting whether Patrick was alone. The Betts family thought the boy might be the son of the pizzeria owner, but since the witness could not provide a clear description, they couldn't confirm anything. This lead quickly unraveled, leaving them back at square one. The emotional strain was overwhelming. As time passed, the family grew more frantic and their appeals to the police became increasingly urgent, emphasizing that Patrick had not run away. After nearly 4 months of relentless effort, the authorities finally agreed to carry out a full investigation, but by that time, crucial months had already passed. In cases of missing persons, the first 48 to 72 hours are crucial. This is when evidence is still fresh, and the chances of finding the person alive are significantly higher. After this period, the chances of getting answers or finding the person decrease sharply. The Betts family was aware of this urgency. While they were relieved that law enforcement was finally involved, they couldn't shake the feeling that the delay had cost them dearly. Their heartbreak was worsened by the lack of media attention. Initially, the police categorized Patrick as a runaway, leading to minimal coverage. Only a few articles were published, and there was virtually no interest from television or local news. It felt as if Patrick had been forgotten even before the search had truly begun. However, the family remained determined and never stopped looking for anything unusual. The day after Patrick disappeared, an unsettling event occurred. Sierra Vista Elementary School received a phone call from a woman claiming to be Patrick's grandmother. She informed the school that Patrick would not be returning because he was moving to Washington to live with her. The call was alarming for a couple of reasons. First, the voice did not belong to his real grandmother. Second, the caller had specific knowledge, including the name of Patrick's school and the fact that his actual grandmother had previously lived in Washington. In truth, Patrick's grandmother had moved from Washington to California months before he went missing, and she had been struggling with cancer. Patrick loved spending time with her and always helped her when he could. Unfortunately, she passed away without knowing what happened to her grandson. This eerie phone call left the family distressed. Was it an attempt to mislead the investigation or a cruel joke? Regardless, it added to the increasing number of mysteries surrounding Patrick's disappearance. Since it was 1988, there were no means to trace the call, no caller ID or digital records, leading to yet another dead end. The strange events didn't end there. For months after Patrick's disappearance, something unusual occurred at the Pizza Chalet. This previously busy spot for local families suddenly closed down without any notice. The owners packed their things and left Upland unexpectedly. It was soon discovered that they had moved to Los Angeles, but when the police tried to find them, they lived together, the family, only for a brief period. Shortly after, they departed again, reportedly heading overseas to the Middle East, which is their country of origin. For the Betts family, this situation was not just peculiar, but very concerning. They wondered why a successful business would shut down so abruptly and why the owners would leave so quickly. Investigators were able to locate the owners of Pizza Chalet, but their lead was short-lived. After they left the country, all leads went cold again. Moreover, the identity of their son, the same boy who had been seen playing with Patrick that night, remained unknown. This meant that the police could not conduct an interview with him. Once again, the Betts family faced a dead end. Their frustration increased, as it felt like they were trapped in an unending nightmare. Every potential lead led to confusion or silence. Just when they thought the situation couldn't get worse, the police made a decision that completely shocked the family. Investigators in Upland unexpectedly focused on Patrick's older brother as a suspect in his disappearance, despite him being only 15 years old at the time. The police became convinced of his involvement without providing any evidence to support their claims. On the night Patrick went missing, his brother was in San Francisco, hundreds of miles away, performing with his band. His bandmates confirmed he was on stage for the entire evening, which ruled him out as a suspect. However, the police took him in for questioning without informing his family, keeping him for over 5 hours. When the Betts family learned of this and arrived at the station, they found him undergoing a polygraph test, which he reportedly did not pass. Things worsened from there. Officers pressured him to write a confession despite not having any valid reason to do so. The Betts family was outraged. They were already grieving Patrick's loss, and now they had to witness their other son being emotionally devastated by unfounded accusation. This traumatic experience left lasting effects. Patrick's brother, who already struggled with anxiety, later developed PTSD. Unfortunately, rather than receiving sympathy, his trauma was misinterpreted by the community as an indication of guilt, when it was actually the result of being wrongfully accused at a young age. This was not the last time Upland investigators disrupted the Betts family's life. In 1991, over 3 years after Patrick disappeared, the family was suddenly awakened before dawn by loud knocks and flashing lights at 6 a.m. The police had returned, this time with a search warrant. Confused, the family looked out to see their home surrounded by officers, bloodhounds, and even people in hazmat suits. They received no warning or explanation. The search lasted more than 12 hours, continuing into the evening. Every room in the house was inspected, and the backyard was thoroughly searched, all without any information about what the investigators were looking for. Months later, they discovered the reason for the search. An anonymous tip had been received, claiming that Patrick's body was buried somewhere under the house. Without confirming the validity of this tip, the investigators proceeded and treated the family as if they were suspects. The experience left the family devastated. Patrick's sister described the officers as lacking any compassion. Their search produced no results, and the leads they received went nowhere, leaving the family without answers. Patrick's case remained largely overlooked. It received minimal media coverage, with no televised appeals, no headlines, and only a few articles in local newspapers. One of the few times Patrick's face gained wider attention was in 1993 when his photo appeared in the music video for Soul Asylum's Runaway Train. This video was part of a campaign to raise awareness about missing children. Patrick's image flickered on screen alongside 35 other missing children, hoping someone might recognize him. While the campaign had some success, 26 of the 36 children featured were found. It did not lead to Patrick's return. As the years went by, the case went cold. Then, something unusual occurred that added to the mystery of Patrick's disappearance. One day, while working as a security officer, Patrick's grown nephew encountered an older man who engaged him in small talk. At first, the conversation seemed normal until the stranger referred to Patrick as Sean, his middle name, which only family and close friends used. And the nephew had never disclosed that detail. What happened next was even more unsettling. The man started speaking about Patrick's case as if he had been following it closely for years. He recited facts and details that sent chills down the nephew's spine. After all, Patrick's disappearance had only gained attention from a brief mention in a music video from the early 90s, and his story was mostly unknown. How could a stranger not only know Patrick's name but also intricate details about a case that few people discussed? Some speculated that the man might have heard of Patrick growing up in Upland, suggesting it could just be local knowledge shared over the years. However, Patrick's family wasn't convinced. They had always felt that his case was overlooked, not something that would stick in the minds of strangers, especially after so many years. Unfortunately, no one could identify the man or determine where he came from. He disappeared just as quickly as he arrived, leaving only discomfort and lingering questions. In February 2022, after many years of inactivity, Patrick's case received renewed attention through the internet. A true crime YouTube channel highlighted Patrick's story after a viewer from Upland requested it. That same month, an emotional city council meeting in Upland featured Patrick's 73-year-old mother, Barbara, and his sister, Pamela, who sought help from the mayor and council members, was also there to share Patrick's story with the officials, hoping for answers. During the meeting, Barbara shared a heartbreaking moment. Her husband, Dennis, Patrick's father, had died in 2009 without ever knowing what happened to their son. With a trembling voice, she expressed that although she no longer believed Patrick was alive, she held on to one final wish: to bring him home, even if it was just to lay him to rest. After over 30 years, her pain had not diminished, it had only deepened. Pamela made a strong appeal as well, urging law enforcement to utilize modern investigative techniques, such as DNA profiling and forensic databases, that were unavailable years ago. She argued that advancements in technology had increased the chances of solving cold cases. However, investigators faced the same challenge as before. Without a suspect or person of interest, they couldn't collect DNA. Nevertheless, there was a shift in the situation. After years of inaction, new interest in the case emerged. Detectives began to revisit witness statements and explore potential leads. While significant breakthroughs hadn't yet occurred, this renewed focus gave the Betts family something they hadn't felt in years: hope. Barbara's health was unfortunately declining. Pamela shared that they were now racing against time, not just to uncover the mystery, but to provide her mother with the closure she had been waiting for far too long. Today would have been Patrick's 48th birthday. The likelihood that he is still alive seems lower, yet the possibility that he was abducted and raised by someone else remains in their minds. If he were alive, wouldn't he have come forward by now? Nonetheless, hope remains strong. Even if Patrick has passed away, the Betts family is determined to find the truth. They seek to understand what happened, to achieve justice, and to find peace. Shannon Graves was born on November 4, 1988, in Ohio, USA. She was raised by her mother, a single mother. Everything changed when her mother met Ronnie DePaul, who became a father figure in her life. Ronnie treats her like his own daughter, and she quickly takes a liking to him. She was known for her kind heart and loving nature. In 2016, Shannon proudly earned her cosmetology license, marking a new beginning after a challenging childhood. Her friends affectionately called her Star, recognizing her free spirit, honesty, and selflessness. However, Shannon's compassionate nature sometimes led her to make poor choices in relationships. Following her mother's death, she struggled with substance abuse. Her close friends observed that she often fell for the wrong men, whether due to bad luck or her attraction to rebellious personalities. Despite these challenges, Shannon was determined to take control of her life. Her professional achievements filled her with hope for a brighter future. Unfortunately, Shannon's intuition was wrong when she became involved with Arturo Novoa. He is of Puerto Rican descent, charming and passionate about music, but he is also very secretive about his life. This secrecy likely stemmed from his lengthy criminal history, which began in 2004 with arrests for assault and property damage. A few months later, he faced charges of escaping from prison and obstructing public service. In 2006, he was charged with felony fleeing after a police chase, followed by aggravated arson charges. After serving his prison term, he was arrested again for trespassing in 2008 after being evicted from his residence. In 2010, he faced additional charges related to weapons and unlawful entry. Court records indicate that he was a man addicted to criminal activity and made a living by illegal means. When Shannon and Arturo began dating in the summer of 2016, everything seemed to be going well. She introduced him to her family and started spending more time at his home. That same year, she got a puppy, which brought her joy and companionship. During the holiday season, she celebrated with her family, enjoying food, laughter, and gift exchanges. This gathering would unknowingly be the last time the family would be together. 2 months later, while with Arturo, Shannon briefly encountered her sister, Debbie DePaul. They discussed Debbie's upcoming birthday in March, for which Shannon was already making plans. However, when the day came, she did not attend, an unusual absence. Initially, her family thought she was just busy and would arrive later, but she never came. Alarmingly, she did not call or send a message, not even to wish Debbie a happy birthday. When she also missed the Easter gathering the following month, concern grew. As time passed, her family's anxiety increased. After calling and texting several times without receiving a response, Ronnie attempted to contact Arturo. He claimed that he and Shannon had broken up and that she had moved to Cleveland with someone else. However, when Ronnie and Debbie tried to contact her directly, they were unsuccessful. Determined to find her, they went to her apartment, but found no clues. Her car and phone were there, but her beloved dog was missing. Around this time, Arturo was arrested on charges related to banned substances. In the following weeks, Shannon's family was engulfed in fear and uncertainty. In June, Debbie officially reported her as a missing person to the police. In their report, family members acknowledged Shannon's past struggles with addiction but highlighted that she had never gone this long without contacting them. Authorities requested anyone with information to come forward while they searched hospitals and jails, but there was still no trace of Shannon. Investigators found tracking her whereabouts to be extremely challenging, especially since she had been missing for months. They filed a request for her phone records and began looking into her personal life, noting that she often spent long periods of time with her boyfriend, Arturo, before her disappearance. The police subsequently interviewed Arturo. He recounted the same story he had told Ronnie, adding complexity to the case. Without a clear timeline for Shannon's disappearance, they could not confirm Arturo's alibi. Additionally, there was no evidence of a new boyfriend with whom Shannon had supposedly moved in. As suspicions rose, detectives learned about an ex-boyfriend named John, and considering this lead, they decided to investigate him further. John, a business owner, had a criminal past involving trafficking of banned substances. His incarceration had led to his breakup with Shannon, as her friends remembered how distressed she was upon learning of his conviction. Complicating matters, John had been released from prison shortly before Shannon was reported missing. When police found and interviewed him, he claimed he hadn't seen her since February, when she mentioned getting back together with Arturo. His statement implied that her relationship with Arturo may not have been as perfect as it seemed. Still, John admitted that he had lingering feelings for her at the time of their last conversation. With two potential suspects but no clear evidence, police were having a hard time getting their case off the ground. When Shannon's phone records were finally released, investigators hoped to glean vital information. Unfortunately, these records only confirmed that she had gone to work as usual in late February before her phone was suddenly turned off. The number had since been reassigned to someone else, and around that same time, all activity on her credit cards also came to a halt. The investigators had no idea that the answer to the case was about to emerge, but in the most frightening way. On July 30th, a man from Youngstown called 911 to report a shocking discovery. He told the operator that he had found human remains inside black garbage bags, and most disturbingly, the head was missing. Upon receiving the signal, rescue workers notified the police, who quickly arrived at the home of the caller, Kenny Eschenbaugh, and his wife, Jill. While forensic experts investigated the remains, Kenny and Jill were brought in for questioning. According to their testimony, the freezer containing the body parts belonged to a friend. A week prior, this friend had asked Kenny and Jill to store it in their basement, claiming it was filled with meat he didn't want to spoil. On July 29th, Jill decided to cook spaghetti and meatballs for dinner and thought she could use some meat from the freezer, planning to replace it later. However, when she approached the freezer, she found it locked. Assuming their friend was just being eccentric, she used a screwdriver to pry it open. To her horror, instead of meat, she found bags filled with what turned out to be human remains. Feeling nauseated, she quickly shut the freezer and called for Kenny. Together, they cautiously opened one of the bags and discovered a human foot. Since Kenny and Jill's stories matched perfectly when questioned separately, they were quickly ruled out as suspects. Investigators then turned their attention to the friend who had left the freezer in their home, named Anthony Gonzalez. Kenny explained that he had met Anthony 4 years earlier through a mutual friend, bonding over their shared interest in music. Although they hung out occasionally, Kenny found Anthony to be unpredictable and sometimes aggressive. Despite being cooperative, the identity of the victim remained a mystery until forensic experts discovered a scorpion tattoo on one of the feet, matching a tattoo belonging to Shannon, a woman who had recently disappeared. While more tests were planned, it increasingly appeared that the remains belonged to her. This left investigators with a concerning question: how and when was Shannon placed in the freezer? Shortly afterward, the lead prosecutor in Ohio held a press conference to discuss this chilling case, which was rapidly becoming one of the most disturbing in recent history. Although the medical examiner couldn't determine the cause of death without the victim's head, Shannon was positively identified through fingerprint analysis. Her family was heartbroken to learn the truth about their beloved daughter, discovering that her fate was far worse than they had ever imagined. Shannon's family and friends gathered in a local park for a candlelight vigil to remember her. Debbie, one of the attendees, told reporters that she believed Shannon has found peace. The vigil was intended to celebrate Shannon's life rather than to focus on sadness. Many people lit candles and released lanterns while wearing shirts with messages honoring Shannon. However, Shannon's family was visibly pained. Ronnie, too devastated to appear on camera, shared his indescribable grief, explaining that he loved Shannon as a daughter and sought justice for her. In the meantime, investigators ramped up the search for Anthony. They soon discovered that Anthony Gonzalez was just an alias. His real name matched the identity of someone they had already suspected, Arturo Novoa. Authorities learned that Arturo had been dating a woman named Katrina Layton, who moved into his house shortly after Shannon was last seen. Given Arturo's lengthy criminal history, the police acted quickly, arresting both him and Katrina and searching their home. The police found red stains on the walls, a knife, and a manual for the freezer where Shannon's remains were located. Kenny, who previously believed his friend's name was Anthony, was shocked to learn Arturo's true identity. He wasn't the only one confused. Arturo often used different names, possibly to conceal his past involving activities related to banned substances. During questioning, Arturo remained composed, repeatedly denying any connection to Shannon's death and claiming ignorance about her whereabouts. He also distanced himself from the freezer. Katrina supported his claims, but their story began to unravel when police discovered a key among her belongings that fit the freezer's lock, linking them to the crime and ensuring they remained in custody. As the investigation continued, Shannon's ex-boyfriend John played a crucial role in uncovering additional information. He spoke to Shannon's friends and learned about a bonfire attended by Arturo. A witness reported that Arturo used the fire to burn personal items and, when questioned, he claimed they were Shannon's clothes, which he burned as revenge for alleged infidelity. That night, he was with his friend Andrew Herman, and they both continued to burn clothing. Investigators later searched the bonfire site and found remnants, including a bracelet that belonged to Shannon. As the investigation progressed, authorities contacted a woman named Jamie, who knew Andrew and his wife, Michelle Eilenfeld. Jamie reveals that Arturo and Katrina were behind Shannon's murder, while Andrew helped handling the body of her body. Jamie stated that Katrina had harbored jealousy towards Shannon for a long time, and that Shannon felt the same way about her. The situation became more complicated when neighbors reported seeing Katrina walking Shannon's dog and using her credit card to make small purchases, suggesting that Katrina had taken over a part of her life. Amid these incidents, Ronnie passed away unexpectedly without witnessing justice. Debbie, overwhelmed with sorrow, sought therapy while caring for her younger brother and Shannon's cherished dog. Meanwhile, Andrew and Michelle were placed in pretrial detention. Authorities gathered a wealth of evidence that Michelle had threatened witnesses, interfered with the investigation, and covered up the crime. As the case went to the jury, the truth of what happened became clearer. On February 24, 2017, Arturo killed Shannon, likely with Katrina present. He later called Andrew to assist him in handling the body. They disposed of her head, stored other body parts in their freezer, and discarded some remains in an undisclosed location that authorities have yet to find. The prosecutor stated that Arturo was merely a small-time dealer of banned substances, acting out of jealousy over Shannon's finances. Katrina, on the other hand, wanted Shannon to keep her distance so she could pursue a relationship with Arturo. Facing the death penalty, the four defendants ultimately accepted plea deals. Arturo Novoa received a life sentence for murdering Shannon. Katrina Layton was sentenced to 18 years, Andrew Herman to 12 years, and Michelle Eilenfeld to 2 years. Arturo attempted to appeal his sentence, but it was upheld. To keep the memory of Shannon alive, Debbie created a social media page dedicated to her younger sister, where she frequently shares pictures of her pet dog. She frequently visits Shannon's grave, where she has established a special ritual. After cutting the grass, Debbie spray paints a large pink heart next to the headstone, which was Shannon's favorite color. In a local interview a few years later, Debbie recalled the devastating call she received about the partial discovery of Shannon's remains. Currently, the investigators who helped convict Arturo are still searching for the missing parts of Shannon's remains. Debbie remains hopeful that they will be found someday as she continues to honor her sister's memory through her dedicated online tribute. In October 1975, the murder of 15-year-old Martha Elizabeth Moxley shocked the town of Greenwich, Connecticut. Her body was found brutally beaten with a golf club, which was traced back to the home of a well-known family with political ties. This tragic event caused years of anguish for the Moxley family as they sought justice for their daughter's death. Let's go back in time. The Moxley family moved to Greenwich, Connecticut, hoping to find a safe environment for their children, John and Martha. Their parents allowed them to explore the town freely, trusting in their safety. Martha was a remarkable teenager known for her beauty and intelligence. She had a vibrant personality and a close bond with her brother. Throughout her childhood, Martha showed impressive intellect. Her love for reading and writing reflected her passion for knowledge. Martha was well liked by her peers because of her outstanding qualities. Her lively and friendly nature helped her make many friends. She often found herself at the center of social gatherings. After the Moxley family moved to their new home in Greenwich, Martha continued to excel in school. Her commitment to her studies showed through her excellent grades and achievements. She had a natural gift for critical thinking and problem solving, distinguishing her from her classmates. Martha's aspirations went beyond academics. She wanted to impact the world through her writing. Her love for storytelling and her talent for expressing ideas clearly made her a strong candidate for a journalism career. October 30th was recognized as Mischief Night in Greenwich. During this tradition, children and teens engaged in playful mischief, often causing minor disturbances in their neighborhoods. The night typically involved activities like vandalism, property damage, and pranks. Eager to join in the fun, Martha Moxley spent the evening playing toilet papering over houses with her friends. It was a joyful night filled with laughter and innocent entertainment among the teenagers. Among the partygoers was 17-year-old Thomas Skakel, the nephew of Ethel Kennedy, who is the widow of former U.S. Senator Robert F. Kennedy. The Kennedy family was one of the most powerful and well-known political families in the United States from the 1960s to the early 1990s. Their name became closely associated with American politics, impacting all areas of society. President John F. Kennedy was viewed as a symbol of youthful energy and change, captivating the nation with his charisma. His administration made important advances in space exploration, civil rights, and foreign policy. After John's assassination, Robert F. Kennedy took on the role of leader for the family's political ambitions, known for his commitment to social justice and strong support for the civil rights movement. Robert's assassination added to the sorrow of the already mourning Kennedy family. However, their involvement in various scandals and controversies has damaged their reputation and overshadowed their political legacy. Sources indicate that Martha Moxley and Thomas Skakel were flirting and even kissing on the night she disappeared. The last sighting of Martha was around 9:30 p.m. when she was with Thomas near the pool in his backyard. After that, no one knew where she was until a shocking discovery was made the next morning, which stunned the entire community. On October 31st, the day after Mischief Night, Martha Moxley's body was discovered under a tree in her yard. Her clothing and underwear were pulled down to her ankles, but the medical examiner found no signs of abuse assault. Nearby, pieces of a 6-iron golf club were located, which became a key piece of evidence in understanding the circumstances surrounding Martha's death. The chief medical examiner of Connecticut performed an autopsy on Martha. His findings revealed disturbing details. Martha had multiple scalp lacerations, skull fractures, and injuries to her brain. The absence of signs of a struggle led the medical examiner to determine that Martha had been violently assaulted. The medical examiner determined that the weapon that caused her injuries and death was a 6-iron golf club, which matched evidence collected at the scene. The severity of her injuries and the strong evidence linking the golf club to the murder confirmed that her death was neither an accident nor an end to her own life. They classified Martha's death as a homicide. Witnesses reported seeing Martha with Thomas Skakel on the night she died, raising suspicions and directing detectives' focus towards the Skakel family. An investigation later found that the golf club used to kill Martha originated from the Skakel home, which further increased doubts about the involvement of the two Skakel brothers. Although the investigation made initial progress, it soon stalled due to interference from the Skakel family. They interfered with the investigation right from the beginning. One significant way they obstructed progress was by blocking the police from accessing their son's school medical records. These records could have shed light on Thomas Skakel's behavior and any health issues he might have had at the time of the crime. By denying investigators this information, the Skakel family hindered the exploration of potential motives. Thomas's father took further actions to impede the investigation. He discouraged witnesses from stepping forward or sharing what they knew about the crime, making it challenging for investigators to gather first-hand testimonies. This interference also significantly hampered the progress of the investigation. When news of Martha's murder emerged, Thomas and Michael Skakel, grandsons of Robert F. Kennedy, became targets of intense media scrutiny. Reporters and the public were eager to uncover any potential involvement or connections to Martha's death. As members of the Kennedy family, the brothers faced overwhelming speculation. Throughout the investigation, Thomas and Michael maintained their innocence, asserting that they had no involvement in Martha's murder. They consistently denied being at the party where she was killed and claimed ignorance about the circumstances of her death. Their repeated denials attracted even more media attention and public interest in the case. However, despite the extensive coverage, there was no solid evidence linking the brothers to Martha's murder. The murder of Martha Moxley attracted worldwide attention because of the involvement of the Kennedy family. Initially, attention turned to Kenneth Littleton, who was hired as a tutor by the Skakel family just hours before Martha's murder. Littleton was a live-in tutor for the Skakel brothers, and since he was present near the crime scene, he was suspected of being an accomplice. His interactions with the brothers were examined, and some believed he might have influenced them to commit the crime. As time passed, the testimonies from Thomas and Michael Skakel about that night began to change. Witnesses reported that Michael had confessed to killing Martha with a golf club. Additionally, a former classmate of Michael claimed he received preferential treatment and boasted about escaping punishment for the murder because of his ties to the Kennedy family. Many books have been written about the Moxley murder in an effort to uncover the truth about her death. One notable book is A Season in Purgatory by acclaimed author Dominic Dunn, which focuses on the Moxley murder case. Dunn conducted thorough research to provide a detailed account of the events leading up to Martha's death. Another significant book, Murder in Greenwich by Mark Furman, a former police detective known, presents his perspective on the investigation and various theories surrounding the case. These books examine different theories proposed by investigators and advocates for justice for Martha. Despite significant media and public interest, the case remained unsolved, which caused frustration for both investigators and the public. The tragic death of Martha Moxley shocked the community and led to a lengthy investigation that lasted nearly 2 decades. In 1998, a jury was assembled to examine the circumstances of her murder. After a thorough inquiry lasting almost 2 years, there was enough evidence to charge Michael Skakel with the crime. In January 2000, police issued an arrest warrant for Michael, who then turned himself in. He was soon released on bail after posting a $500,000 bond. On March 14, 2000, Michael was arraigned in juvenile court. Although he was 15 years old when Martha was murdered, the judge decided to try him as an adult. Michael Skakel's trial began on May 7, 2002, in Norwalk, Connecticut. Prosecutors built a strong case by presenting evidence linking him to the crime and highlighting inconsistencies in his alibi. The defense maintained that Michael was innocent, arguing he was at a cousin's house when the murder occurred. The murder trial of Martha Moxley received extensive media coverage, drawing attention from both national outlets and the local community. Many people were invested in the case, hoping for justice for the victim. During the trial, the prosecution introduced a book proposal that suggested his involvement in the crime. In this proposal, Michael admitted to engaging in inappropriate behavior while in a tree on the night of the murder. Although he acknowledged being at the crime scene, he did not confess to directly harming Martha. Ultimately, on June 7, 2002, Michael Skakel was convicted of Moxley's murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. He was assigned to Garner Correctional Facility in Newtown, Connecticut. Reactions to the verdict were mixed, with some individuals feeling satisfied and others raising concerns. Michael Skakel appealed his conviction, presenting several arguments. One of his main points was that the trial should have occurred in juvenile court instead of superior court, as he was only 15 years old at the time of the crime. He contended that his age should have prevented him from being charged as an adult. Furthermore, Skakel claimed that the prosecution committed misconduct by not disclosing crucial evidence that could have exonerated him, which he argued violated his due process rights and compromised the fairness of his trial. Nevertheless, in January 2006, the Connecticut Supreme Court dismissed his claims and upheld his conviction. In 2007, Michael Skakel hired a new attorney and requested a retrial in Connecticut court, proposing a new theory regarding Martha Moxley's murder. His defense team presented evidence implying that Gitano Tony Bryant, cousin of Los Angeles Lakers player Kobe Bryant and former classmate of Michael at Brunswick Private School in Greenwich. In an August 2003 videotaped interview with Vito Colucci, a private investigator hired by Michael, Bryant said that on the night of Moxley's murder, one of his friends had tried to molest her. Bryant said he had not come forward because his mother had warned him that, as a black man, he would be framed for the unsolved murder. A 2-week hearing in April 2007 allowed this oral evidence to be presented, along with other matters. In September 2007, Michael's attorneys filed a motion, based in part on Bryant's complaints, for a new trial. Official prosecutors responded that Bryant may have made up the story to sell a drama about the case. During this period, Michael's defense team appointed several full-time investigators to examine case details, hoping to uncover new evidence that would prove his innocence. Unfortunately, their efforts were hindered when a Supreme Court judge rejected Michael's request for a new trial, stating that Bryant's testimony lacked credibility and that there was no evidence of misconduct by the prosecutors during Michael's initial trial. Michael's attorneys once again appealed this ruling to the Connecticut Supreme Court. In 2009, a panel of 5 judges listened to the appeal, but a year later, on April 12, 2010, they ruled 4-1 against Michael. Despite these challenges, Michael and his legal team remained determined to secure his freedom. In January 2012, they requested a sentence reduction, arguing that he had been an exemplary prisoner and warranted leniency. However, this request was denied, and Michael's sentence continued to stand. In 2013, Michael Skakel appealed his conviction, claiming that his trial attorney, Michael Sherman, had not provided effective representation. During the hearing, Michael Skakel accused Sherman of lacking interest in his defense and being more focused on collecting fees to resolve his financial issues. This raised serious doubts about the fairness of his trial and the potential for a wrongful conviction. As a result, Michael was granted a new trial after it was determined that Sherman had not adequately defended him during his 2002 trial. On November 21, 2013, Michael Skakel was released on $1.2 million bail with other conditions. He must be monitored with a GPS device, have no contact with the Moxley family, must be checked in periodically by phone, and will not be allowed to leave the state of Connecticut unless permission is granted, although he later moved to Westchester County, New York. In December 2016, the Connecticut Supreme Court reinstated Michael's murder conviction in a 4-3 majority decision, writing that his conviction was the result of overwhelming evidence presented by prosecutors and that his legal representation was adequate. In January 2018, prosecutors asked the Connecticut Supreme Court to revoke Michael's bail and return him to prison to continue serving his sentence. However, on May 4, the Connecticut Supreme Court vacated Skakel's conviction and ordered a new trial. The court ruled that Sherman had provided ineffective assistance when he failed to contact an alibi witness named by Michael and that Michael had therefore been deprived of a fair trial. State prosecutors in Stamford have the right to seek a new trial for Michael. This ruling surprised many in the legal community and rekindled questions about the true circumstances of the crime. Despite the possibility of a new trial, in October 2020, the chief state attorney informed the Supreme Court that they would not retry Michael Skakel for Martha's murder. This decision came after a thorough review of the evidence. This decision marked the end of a lengthy legal battle that spanned decades and left many unanswered questions about the murder of Martha Moxley. In 2023, Michael Skakel filed lawsuits against the police investigator in Greenwich. The lawsuits alleged malicious prosecution and violations of constitutional rights. According to Michael's attorney, the fact that Michael spent over 11 years in prison for a crime he did not commit meant he could never be compensated for that lost time. Michael's lawsuits claimed that the lead investigator did not perform their duties properly, acted unethically, and intimidated witnesses during interviews, alleged that the investigator threatened witnesses to make them give false statements. These accusations raised significant concerns about the integrity of the investigation and the validity of Michael Skakel's conviction. Furthermore, the lawsuits argued that the investigator sought to profit from Michael's case, indicating that they were working on a book and film about Michael's supposed involvement in Martha's murder while continuing the investigation. Martha's brother, John, was shocked by the news of Michael's freedom and struggles to grasp the reasoning behind the court's decision. He is convinced that Michael Skakel is guilty and insists that just because Michael is free, it doesn't mean he is innocent. Instead, it reflects the judge's decisions and legal technicalities. In John's view, Michael Skakel killed his sister, a belief he holds firmly. Even though Michael is no longer in prison, John believes he will always be mentally imprisoned, tormented by his actions for the rest of his life. The Oxygen created a powerful documentary exploring the details of Martha Moxley's murder. The Moxley family chose to be part of the documentary to honor Martha and promote the truth about her case. Over the years, many theories have emerged regarding Martha Moxley's death. One of the key suspects is Michael Skakel. Several motives have been suggested for his alleged involvement, including jealousy and anger. Martha had a close friendship with Michael's brother, Thomas Skakel, which might have fueled Michael's resentment towards her. It has also been speculated that Michael may have seen a meeting between Martha and Thomas that triggered feelings of insecurity. Another suspect is Thomas Skakel himself. One theory proposes that he may have killed Martha out of jealousy or rage, especially since she reportedly rejected his advances. Additionally, their family tutor, Kenneth Littleton, has been considered a possible suspect. Others believe that her murderer was simply someone who happened to be passing by. Proponents of these theories argue that Michael Skakel was an easy target and that the true murderer has not yet been caught. Joanna Simpson was born in 1964. Her wealthy family lived in York, Yorkshire, UK, where she spent most of her childhood. Joanna attended an all-girls primary school and completed several grades before her family decided to move. The Simpsons relocated to Laxey on the Isle of Man after her father sold his construction company. After finishing local school, Joanna went to Oxford High School and then pursued business studies at Bath University. She was quite popular among her peers, was known as a well-mannered, kind, and optimistic girl. She willingly supported everyone she communicated with, which attracted people to her. Fellow students always crowded around her, eager to spend time together. Naturally, there were always young people in this group who were looking for her attention. Despite this, Joanna was more focused on her work and career. She wanted to establish herself before starting a family. She decided to get married in 1994 when she turned 30. Her husband also came from a wealthy family. Together, they bought a large house in Ascot, which was in a derelict state and required significant repairs. At that time, they did not have children, so the choice of such a large house seemed excessive to some. They lived there alone, not far from Windsor, where the royal family's castle was located. Additionally, Legoland was nearby, making this location appear to be a great option for expanding the family. However, Joanna was in no hurry to do so. She planned to convert part of the house into a guest house so that relatives and friends could visit often. Her husband supported her aspirations, but perhaps he wanted to have children. After 3 years of marriage, her husband decided to end their relationship. It seemed that this decision stemmed from his disappointment over not having children. Joanna was shocked by this decision. Her friends noticed how depressed she had become and wanted to help her. One of her close friends was a senior flight attendant and had a flight planned to South Africa. She invited Joanna to accompany her, hoping that a change of scenery would help Joanna regain her spirits. Joanna agreed. As it turned out, this decision was fateful. During the flight, she met a man named Robert Brown, who was the pilot of the British Airways airline on which she was traveling. Robert was an avid runner. He had been a British cross-country champion 3 times, which he was very proud of. It seemed they had a lot in common, and an affair began. Joanna retained ownership of the house after her first marriage, as she had invested most of the money into it. She and her new lover moved in together in September 1998. They began to think about marriage. By Christmas, Robert proposed. When everything happened so quickly, Joanna was usually more cautious, but not this time. After getting engaged, they married in February 1999. This rush surprised many, including Joanna's parents, who had only seen Robert a few times by that point. They did not have a good impression of him, believing he was too arrogant and unable to offer their daughter the love she deserved. However, it was futile to dissuade Joanna. She was independent and old enough to make her own decisions. The only thing her parents could do was encourage her to draft a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. The Simpsons believed this relationship might end quickly and did not want their daughter to worry about a potential divorce or risk losing part of her property. The newlyweds did not want to attract too much attention or organize an overly lavish ceremony. Afterward, they immediately traveled to South Africa, the country where they had first met. Joanna hoped to have an unforgettable honeymoon, but within the first few days of the trip, she began to doubt the soundness of her choice. Robert treated the hotel staff with such arrogance that Joanna felt uncomfortable. She had never witnessed her partner behaving so rudely before. After returning from her honeymoon, Joanna called her mother to express her worries. She admitted she was questioning her decision to marry Robert, realizing she didn't know him well enough. She was disturbed by his behavior during the honeymoon and feared his rudeness might eventually be directed at her. Although she began to see her marriage as a mistake, Joanna didn't end the relationship right away after returning from South Africa. She still hoped she could change him. This decision was likely influenced by the pregnancy she discovered after the trip. Like many women, she believed that having a baby would encourage Robert to become more attentive and caring as a father. However, Robert's actions seemed to indicate otherwise, undermining her hopes. Instead of becoming more considerate when he learned that his wife was pregnant, he grew even ruder and more disrespectful. This negative behavior also affected her relatives and friends. Joanna, however, did not want a divorce because she feared that their child would grow up without a father, which she thought would be a major problem. When their first son, Alex, was born, things changed only slightly. A few months later, Joanna became pregnant again and gave birth to their daughter, Katie, but this second child did not improve Robert's behavior. Although he did not physically harm Joanna, which may have prevented a breakup, their family and friends could see how much he was psychologically hurting her. Robert was toxic and rude to Joanna's family, friends, which caused her a lot of distress. Over time, their differences became more apparent. It was clear they should not have been together. Joanna recognized this, but their children made it difficult for them to separate. After the birth of her first child, she often said their marriage would not last and that divorce was unavoidable. She tried to endure the situation for 8 years, but eventually realized she couldn't continue like this. Her final decision came after her husband revealed his disturbing thoughts, including violent fantasies about harming her and their children. He contemplating end one's own life by crashing a plane. Feeling terrified, Joanna filed for divorce in 2007. From that moment on, Robert's behavior worsened significantly. He began to openly express his strong dislike for Joanna's loved ones and even for Joanna herself. He started to manipulate her by hinting at the possibility of end one's own life. When that tactic failed, he began making indirect threats about harming Joanna and their children. Joanna was uncertain about whether to take his words seriously or see them as mere manipulation. She suspected that Robert was fabricating these threats to pressure her into withdrawing her divorce application. He told his friends that he didn't want to distance himself from the children. However, due to his job, which required him to travel frequently, he often spent weeks abroad, leaving little opportunity for him to connect with them. Despite his negative feelings about the separation, Robert never changed his behavior in a way that would make Joanna reconsider her decision to divorce. After Joanna filed for divorce, they continued to live together for a few months. An incident later made Joanna realize that her decision was justified. One evening, while they were putting their children to bed, a conflict erupted. Robert falsely accused Joanna of cheating, a claim he regularly made without any evidence. Joanna, who was fully committed to caring for their children, had no time for an affair. She attempted to defend herself, but her efforts seemed in vain. The argument escalated in the kitchen, and at one point, Robert grabbed a knife, confronted her. He even pressed the blade against her throat, threatening to harm her. Despite the serious situation, Joanna remained composed. She explained that any desire to harm her was illogical because her husband knew she was a good mother. Killing her would leave their children without either parent. Joanna pointed out that if Robert acted violently, he would likely face imprisonment. Eventually, she persuaded him to put down the knife. The following day, Joanna shared the incident with her mother and some friends. They all agreed she should report it to the police because it was a serious matter. They observed that Robert's behavior had become erratic and dangerous since she filed for divorce. Joanna was worried that if she reported her husband, it would negatively affect their children, so she wanted to avoid putting them under that stress. She thought the situation would improve on its own. After his aggressive outburst, She spoke to him again and made it clear that their relationship could not be repaired. He accepted this reality. Now, Joanna insisted that Robert move out of her house because she felt that living together could be unsafe for everyone. However, he refused to leave, saying he would not change his residence. Robert enjoyed living in a large house and a comfortable lifestyle. They even offered him money to help him buy an apartment, but he remained steadfast in his decision. Many believed he was holding out for a better financial offer since Joanna came from a wealthy background. Robert was offered progressively larger sums of money until he finally agreed to move out. This decision brought Joanna relief. She no longer felt threatened. They shared custody of their children, and Joanna was waiting for the divorce to be finalized. However, a heated argument erupted over how to divide their house. Despite their prenuptial agreement, Robert refused to give up the property. Unfortunately, they still had to communicate about visits with their son and daughter. They lived apart, and Robert even started dating a flight attendant from his job. Not long into their relationship, she got pregnant. Joanna initially thought this was good news, believing it would help Robert move on from her, but she was mistaken. On November 1, 2010, one of Joanna's close friends received a call from her children's school because Joanna's kids had not shown up. The teachers tried to reach Joanna but could not get a response. They eventually contacted her friend, who was unsure of Joanna's whereabouts. Joanna had planned to fly to the island of Man to visit her parents, leaving uncertainty about when she vanished or what had happened to the children, 9 and 10-year-olds. After receiving a call from the school, Joanna's friend reached out to her mother. The mother mentioned that Joanna should have returned to Ascot after their trip to Isle of Man. Although she hadn't talked to Joanna on her return day, the call made her anxious, so she attempted to contact her daughter. To her dismay, there was no response. Unable to locate Joanna, they decided to notify the police. By this time, Robert had already arranged a meeting with law enforcement, an appointment to discuss a serious family incident in which he was involved. After reviewing the statements, the detectives decided to visit the home of Joanna to check. When they arrived, no one was there. They repeated knocking went unanswered. The officers chose to force the door open to gain entry. Once inside, they quickly spotted suspicious stains in the hallway that appeared to be blood. Despite a thorough search, they found no evidence of Joanna. There were no signs of anyone, including the children. The police left the house without any leads and returned to the station, where they awaited Robert's arrival for the scheduled meeting. When he arrived, he oddly refused to answer any questions about his wife. This was surprising as he had originally contacted the police and requested the meeting. Due to Joanna's ongoing disappearance, the decision was made to arrest Robert. They intended to conduct a more detailed search of the large property where Joanna lived. The situation remained puzzling, and they were not in a rush to file charges against him. The authorities started searching the entire area while also talking to Joanna's family. They all insisted that she couldn't have simply vanished and had no intention of taking her children anywhere. However, Joanna's relatives expressed negative views about Robert, convinced that he was the only one who could be involved in her disappearance. On the first day of the search, the only verified information was that Robert had taken the children to his brother's house. Joanna's family found some comfort in knowing that Alex and Katie were safe. On November 2, 2010, Robert was questioned again. Whenever the detectives asked him about the events of October 31st, he mostly responded without elaborating. The police then changed their strategy and started discussing everyday topics, which made him more engaged. He excitedly talked about his passion for running. However, when the conversation turned to Joanna, he became withdrawn and anxious. He described his marriage with her but focused on criticizing her, calling her a spoiled child, trying to cast her in a negative light. He repeatedly pointed out that Joanna and her family were financially stable, suggested that they did not understand the struggles of earning money. By the end of the conversation, the police felt that Robert disliked her, particularly because the Simpsons were wealthier than he was. Robert grew up in a modest family in Edinburgh. His father worked at the docks, and his mother was employed by a bank. While they managed their finances well and met their needs, they were not as financially secure as Joanna's family. Robert, a pilot earning around £150,000 a year, had few reasons to complain about his life. Still, he often expressed dissatisfaction with his situation. The detective spent a considerable amount of time discussing various abstract topics with Robert, during which he was quite talkative. However, when they inquired about Joanna and the events of October 31st, he repeatedly said he had no comment. When the detectives expressed confusion, Robert explained that he was experiencing a mental blockage, making it difficult for him to answer those questions. Despite their persistent efforts to encourage him to speak, the detectives were unable to get any more information, forcing them to continue their investigation elsewhere. Joanna's house was extensively searched, revealing additional blood in the living room and in various spots in the courtyard and driveway. The arrangement of the bloodstains indicated that her body might have been relocated. All samples were gathered for testing, which later verified that the blood matched Joanna's. Authorities suspected that Robert had murdered his ex-wife, but the reason for his alleged crime was still unclear. 3 years after their breakup, Robert had begun a new life with another woman. Despite this, he expressed concern for Joanna's financial situation. He had signed a prenuptial agreement, which meant he was not obligated to worry about her finances after their divorce and would not receive any financial support. However, it became clear that Joanna had not been transparent about her family's financial status. Even after they separated, Robert occasionally returned to her home while she was away. He persuaded his children to provide him with a new security code for the alarm system, granting him unrestricted access to the house. Robert's main focus was on his ex-wife's financial documents. He became fixated on the belief that Joanna had significant amounts of money in different accounts. At one point, his imagination ran wild, leading him to believe she possessed up to £25 million, which he thought he could claim if it weren't for their prenuptial agreement. Historically, the British legal system did not recognize these agreements, leading to inevitable legal disputes. However, starting from October 20, 2010, prenuptial agreements began to be acknowledged without extra bureaucratic hurdles. As a result, in the case of a divorce, Robert would not be able to claim any of his wife's wealth, and he was aware of this reality. The next court hearing for the divorce case was set for November 8, 2007, and it seemed likely to be their final meeting before the marriage was officially ended. This context may explain why Robert chose to confront his wife a week earlier. On Sunday, October 31st, Alex and Katie spent the whole day with their father. He was supposed to bring them back to their mother, Joanna, who had been eagerly preparing for their return. She missed them and had baked a chocolate cake as well as made their favorite dish. Joanna usually invited a friend to join her for such occasions because she felt uneasy being alone with her ex, but this time her friend couldn't make it, leaving Joanna to welcome Alex and Katie by herself. The police spoke to the children of Joanna, who provided key details about the situation. The argument between the parents started when Robert returned Alex and Katie to their mother around 4 p.m. Although the children were in a different room and couldn't see what was happening, they heard sounds that seemed like physical violence, described as dull thuds. After a while, the noises stopped. Then, Robert carried Joanna out of the room and placed her in the trunk of his car. He told the children that their mother had fallen and was hurt, so he needed to take her to the hospital. After closing the trunk, he instructed Alex and Katie to get in the car, drove them to his new girlfriend's home, where they stayed. Robert left them there and did not come back until around 7 p.m. When he returned, Joanna was not with him. He avoided answering Alex's questions directly. It became clear that Robert's actions during the 3 hours he was unaccounted for were a mystery, as was Joanna's whereabouts. Later, the police interviewed Robert again, but his answers remained the same. He was questioned a total of 9 times and never mentioned October 31st or anything about his ex-wife. After the final interview, he asked to speak privately with his lawyer. They went into a separate office. About 20 minutes later, his lawyer returned and read a statement in which Robert admitted to killing his ex-wife. Robert explained that he and Joanna had been arguing over their children's education. At one point, he lost control, remembered hitting her several times before deciding to take the children home and rush Joanna away. However, after, he realized that Joanna had already died. In a panic, Robert decided to dump the body and hide it in the woods. His explanation didn't seem credible because Robert could have immediately taken his wife to the hospital. It was also unclear why he chose to hide her in the trunk instead of placing Joanna in the car. It appeared that Robert recognized that Joanna was dead and wanted to shield the children from the sight of their mother, so he concealed her in the trunk. He eventually agreed to lead the investigators to the location where he had hidden Joanna's body. They indeed discovered the body of Joanna at the spot he indicated. It was clear that without Robert's confession, finding the body would have been nearly impossible. He took great care in transporting Joanna several kilometers away from the closest road and into the thick, secluded, near Legoland Windsor woods. There, he dug a deep hole, carefully leveled it, and covered it with leaves to hide any trace of what had happened. The police did not believe Robert because the hole was very deep and showed no signs of freshly dug soil. They estimated that he would have had to remove about 400 kilograms of soil beforehand, which would have taken a significant amount of time. Additionally, the ground was already frozen, making it even more challenging to dig. Given these factors, it seemed impossible that he could have done all this in just 3 hours, and they suspected he had disposed of the soil elsewhere. This suggested he had likely dug a grave in advance, supporting the theory of a carefully planned murder. They found Simpson's body in a black bag inside a plastic box buried underground. Later, Alex and Katie visited the site to lay flowers in memory of their mother. They mentioned they knew the area well and even had a secret hideout nearby. The last time they were there was during the holidays when they were visiting their father. It was likely during that time that he began digging a hole for his ex-wife while the children played in their hideout. Robert continued to assert that he did not plan Joanna's murder. He claimed it was an accident, stating that the stress from a lengthy and challenging divorce caused him to lose control. His lawyer argued that he acted out of passion, which could lead to a lighter sentence for him. However, a forensic examination revealed that Joanna sustained at least 14 blows to the head with a blunt object. The weapon, a hammer with a nail puller, was found at the site where her body was buried. If Robert had not intended to kill her, why did he bring the murder weapon into the house? He later explained that he took the hammer from his shed and secretly placed it in his daughter's backpack, but he could not provide a reason for this. Furthermore, other items discovered with the hammer, such as a protective suit, plastic shoe covers, and rubber gloves, suggested he had planned the crime. After the murder, he removed the CCTV unit from the house along with the hammer and disposed of both, indicating that he had carefully prepared for the act and behaved quite rationally. On May 11, 2011, Brown appeared at Reading Crown Court for a 10-day trial. He denied murdering Joanna but pleaded guilty to manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. The defense presented a psychiatric report indicating that Brown was experiencing a psychotic disorder when he killed her. Initially, a defense psychiatrist diagnosed him with stress-related adjustment disorder. The psychiatrist explained to the jury that significant stressors in Brown's life, including a difficult divorce, contributed to this condition, leading to mental and emotional instability that affected his self-control. However, Philip Joseph, a forensic psychiatrist for the prosecution, disagreed with the defense's assessment. After meeting with Brown in prison, Joseph described him as an intelligent man and a resilient person. He characterized Brown as a controlled person and noted that if Brown were unable to handle stress, it would be challenging for him to continue working as an airline pilot. On the first day of the trial, one of Joanna's friends gave evidence regarding a previous knife incident, when Brown had stabbed Joanna in the chest. In court, Brown denied that this had happened. The trial concluded on May 24. On the murder charge, the jury returned a not guilty verdict. Robert Brown was convicted of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 26 years in prison, including 2 years for obstructing a police investigation. Simpson's family and friends described the failure to convict of murder as a miscarriage of justice. Robert is eligible for mid-term release, with the remainder of his sentence suspended and monitored by the National Probation Service. In March 2023, as Robert could have been released in early November, Simpson's family and friends launched a campaign against it, citing the Police, Crime, Sentencing in Courts Act 2022. This act allows the Attorney General to block the release of any prisoner they believe poses a serious risk to the public. The campaign received support from former Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland, former Home Secretary Priti Patel, Jess Phillips, the then Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding, and Carrie Johnson, an anti-domestic violence campaigner and wife of former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. On October 10th, Justice Minister Alex Chalk KCMP announced that Robert would not be automatically released from prison but would instead be referred to the parole board. Robert challenged this decision in the High Court, but he was unsuccessful, arguing that Chalk had overturned a decision made by the judge at the original trial. Try to turn pain into strength. Joanna's mother and friend Hetty Barkworth Nanton was awarded a CBE in the 2024 New Year Honors for services to those affected by domestic violence and murder.
It was a quiet evening in Bristol, just after 8 p.m., when things took a dark turn inside a home. The shouting grew louder, followed by a sudden silence. A young child stood at the top of the stairs, watching what no child should ever see. Someone lying on the kitchen floor downstairs, bleeding. The other person was already trying to hide what had happened. This wasn't just a fight. It was the breaking point of a relationship full of jealousy, anger, and years of warning signs. No one expected that night to end in tragedy, but when the truth came out, it shocked everyone. Abigail White was born in 1998 and raised in Bristol, England. The early chapters of her life were defined not by innocence or joy, but by chaos and abuse. From a young age, Abigail found herself in a home dominated by violence. Her father was abusive, routinely harming her mother. Though her parents eventually divorced, any hope for peace was short-lived. Abigail's mother entered a new relationship, and a new man moved into the home. Instead of stability, the cycle of abuse continued, with the new man creating a similarly hostile environment. When Abigail's mother gave birth to a new child, her stepfather's cruelty escalated. He began abusing Abigail. The trauma was finally exposed. Abigail was removed from the home and placed into foster care, but the damage had already taken root. Foster care was supposed to be a turning point, a place to heal, but Abigail carried her scars with her. School became an ongoing struggle. She had trouble focusing, lashed out frequently, and reacted violently to the smallest disruptions. Her anger wasn't just surface level. It came from a deep place, a defense mechanism forged by years of trauma. She demanded control in all situations, often exploding when she didn't get her way. Eventually, her behavior led to expulsion, and she was transferred to a school designed for students with serious behavioral issues. She briefly lived with her grandmother, but even that environment proved too volatile. Her grandmother couldn't handle Abigail's unpredictable moods. The girl was just 13 when she was sent back to her biological father, an alcoholic who was in no position to provide stability or guidance. Though Abigail made efforts to attend therapy, her pain remained raw. She began drinking, and cocaine followed. She would later say the banned substance were the only escape from the constant darkness in her mind. By 15, Abigail had attempted to end her own life twice. That year, she met her first boyfriend, and it was her first taste of what she believed love could be. For 7 months, she felt some kind of happiness, but once the relationship ended, she spiraled again, and her next relationship would be even more damaging. At 16, she began seeing a 29-year-old man, an age gap that raised eyebrows, but no red flags stopped the relationship. It lasted 2 years, ending shortly after she turned 18. She officially moved into social housing. It was a modest space, but for Abigail, it was the first time she had a home that felt like hers. That's when she reconnected with Bradley Lewis. They had known each other during their school years, but now, as adults, something more grew between them. Abigail was 19. Bradley was 17. Their relationship moved quickly, and they soon welcomed their first child. Over the next 5 years, 2 more children followed. By 23, Abigail was a mother of 3, and Bradley, just 21, worked full-time as a floor installer. Abigail stayed home, raising their children and trying to build a life. But living on one income was hard. Desperate to contribute financially, she began seeking alternative ways to make money from home. That's when she discovered the world of online adult modeling. Abigail launched an OnlyFans account. Her content was bold, provocative, and quickly became a success. Within a year, she earned 50,000 British pounds. While her income eventually decreased, it still provided a steady income and a taste of validation she had never known before. But money didn't solve her problems. Behind the scenes, her relationship with Bradley was deteriorating. Their home life became increasingly toxic, defined by frequent arguments and violent outbursts, followed by recurring breakups and reconciliations. Neither seemed able to walk away. Despite the mounting emotional damage, Abigail's rage extended beyond the home. In one disturbing incident, she attacked a woman in a nightclub bathroom, convinced the woman had looked at her the wrong way. The victim was severely beaten, and Abigail was sentenced to 12 months of community service. In her daily life, Abigail was controlling, demanding that everything go her way. She issued orders to Bradley, with zero tolerance for disobedience, erupting if he didn't comply. She craved constant affirmation, from compliments to gifts, and any perceived neglect triggered violent confrontations. Her need for attention was insatiable. The relationship between Abigail and Bradley had long ceased to be healthy. What remained was a cycle of fights, betrayals, and emotional warfare. Most days were marked by shouting matches and cold silences that stretched late into the night. Their children were caught in the middle, silently absorbing the surrounding chaos. From an outsider's perspective, the solution seemed obvious: separation. However, neither Abigail nor Bradley seemed ready to leave. Their relationship was characterized by infidelity. Though they were not in an open relationship, both cheated, both knew about the other's affairs, and both reacted with jealousy. Abigail, in particular, demanded immediate responses to her messages. Any delay triggering paranoia that Bradley was with another woman. Ironically, while she was also seeing other men, their boundaries became even more blurred when they engaged in group intimate encounters. Their situation was not merely dysfunctional, it was explosive. Things deteriorated further when Abigail became pregnant and discovered that Bradley had also fathered a child with another woman. That betrayal intensified an already volatile dynamic. Abigail's rage was relentless. Friends and family on both sides urged them to separate before something irreversible happened. Abigail's parents openly despised Bradley, not only for his repeated infidelities, but also for inappropriate messages he had allegedly sent to Abigail's sister. Bradley's family, meanwhile, had their own reasons to distrust Abigail, especially after she stabbed him in the leg during an argument. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it served as a physical reminder of the turmoil they both refused to escape. Around this time, Abigail's previous assault in the nightclub caught the attention of social services. Authorities ordered a welfare check, concerned for the well-being of the children. The assessment was clear. Abigail and Bradley were living in a toxic and potentially dangerous environment. To avoid losing custody, they agreed to live apart. Bradley moved in with his mother, finding his first sense of peace in years. That brief separation gave Bradley clarity, leading him to seriously consider ending the relationship for good. But when he expressed his doubts to Abigail, her reaction was immediate and severe. She threatened self-harm, an alarming threat given her mental health history. Over time, the threats escalated. She said she would kill the women Bradley had cheated with, the mother of his other child, his own mother, and eventually Bradley himself. By early 2022, Abigail's downward spiral was visible to all. She began posting aggressive and disturbing content on TikTok, airing their dirty laundry with no restraint. She mocked Brad, shared intimate details, and even confessed to violent behavior she had inflicted on Bradley. He felt increasingly trapped. He told friends he feared for his safety, but was too afraid of what Abigail might do if he left. On March 18th, she decided to terminate the pregnancy, a decision Bradley supported afterward. One day later, on March 19th, tensions exploded again. Abigail accused Bradley of cheating, and the fight ended with her stabbing him in the arm. He needed medical treatment, but chose not to report the truth, telling hospital staff it had been an accident. At this time, Abigail messaged a friend, admitting that her relationship had become so dangerous that she believed it would end in one of two ways. Either she would be dead or she would end up in prison. She confessed that she believed herself capable of killing Bradley. Just 6 days later, on March 25th, Abigail and Bradley met in a park for what was intended as a final, honest conversation. Abigail brought a friend, likely to maintain a sense of control or for protection. During the meeting, Bradley told her he was ending the relationship, this time for good. To everyone's surprise, Abigail didn't erupt. She didn't scream or lash out. For once, she remained eerily calm, but with her calmness was never a guarantee of peace. It was often the quiet before a catastrophe. Later that same day, they made plans to meet again. A gathering at a pub was arranged, with a few close friends joining them. Abigail brought their 3 children along. Perhaps trying to project a sense of normalcy, they agreed to meet at around 5 p.m., but when that time passed, Bradley still hadn't shown up. By 5:30 p.m., Abigail began firing off angry messages, furious at his tardiness. Her fury was fueled by the alcohol she had already consumed and further amplified by banned substance. The combination only intensified her volatility. When Bradley finally arrived at 7 p.m., he was met not with a smile, but with raw, seething rage. Abigail had convinced herself he'd been with another woman. Bradley retreated to the restroom with a friend, desperate to decompress and speak freely. There, he admitted how lost he felt and how helpless the situation had become. He no longer knew how to reason with Abigail, but even in that small, private space, there was no escape. When Bradley and his friend emerged, Abigail was waiting just outside the door. She exploded, screaming and accusing them of conspiring against her. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Bradley. In front of stunned onlookers, Abigail launched a violent assault. Bradley's friend tried to pull her away to restore calm, but Abigail spat directly in his face. The situation had escalated beyond control. Fearing further violence, Bradley's friends decided to leave. Abigail and Bradley remained, attempting once again to patch things up. Bradley ordered a round of beers, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but Abigail slapped them off the table, sending glass and foam crashing to the floor. Customers looked on in disbelief. Strangers tried to intervene, hoping to prevent further escalation, but Abigail turned on them, too, throwing a drink at one man and spitting in his face. When the man tried to push her away in self-defense, Abigail fell. She immediately called the police to report an assault, omitting the key detail that she had provoked the confrontation. Her children witnessed the entire ordeal, absorbing yet another violent chapter in their already unstable home life. By 8 p.m., Abigail and Bradley and their kids left the pub. A friend they met outside offered them a ride home. On the way back, Bradley made a comment that would later send chills down the spine of everyone who heard it. "I'm already dead," he said, aware of what likely awaited him at home. And he was right. As soon as they stepped through the front door, the argument resumed, louder, angrier, and more volatile than ever. Abigail blamed Bradley for what had happened at the pub, furious that he hadn't defended her against the man she accused of attacking her. At some point during the shouting, Abigail walked into the kitchen and came back holding a knife. Bradley had seen this before. Blades weren't new to their arguments, but this time she didn't hesitate. In one swift, violent motion, Abigail drove the knife directly into his chest. In the background, their 3-year-old son had crept downstairs, drawn by the noise. He witnessed it all. Both Abigail and Bradley froze. The rage disappeared, replaced by stunned silence. Bradley, bleeding heavily, stumbled back into the kitchen and collapsed onto the floor. But instead of immediately calling for help, Abigail panicked. Rather than grabbing the phone, she grabbed cleaning supplies. She put Bradley's blood-stained shirt into the washing machine. She tried to scrub the floor clean. She didn't want anyone to see what she had done, not even herself. This was the third time Abigail had injured Bradley with a knife, but this time she knew it was different. This wound wouldn't fade into a scar. It was too deep. Moments later, hearing the commotion, a neighbor rushed over. She found Abigail distraught, barefoot, wearing a pink dress, and sporting a bruise on her arm, but no trace of blood. Bradley, meanwhile, lay motionless on the kitchen floor. Leaning over him to check for a pulse, she felt the faintest trace of breath. With trembling hands, she began performing CPR, while still on the phone with emergency services. The operator instructed her to apply direct pressure to the chest wound. As she did, she noticed something deeply alarming. Very little blood was escaping. This was a terrifying sign of internal bleeding, indicating Bradley's body was beginning to shut down. The neighbor attempted to place him in the recovery position, but he was too heavy for her to move alone. Around 8:22 p.m., her husband returned home and immediately sensed that something was wrong next door. When he entered the house, he found his wife desperately trying to keep Bradley alive and took over chest compressions. Time was quickly slipping away. By 8:48 p.m., police had arrived, already spiraling into hysteria. Abigail called a friend, claiming Bradley had harmed himself. She insisted he had tried to take his own life and begged for reassurance that he would survive. The story had already begun to shift. Moments later, paramedics arrived. Bradley, just 22 years old, was rushed to the hospital and taken straight into surgery. But the damage was too severe. The knife had penetrated very deep, straight into his heart. Despite hours of surgical efforts, doctors pronounced him dead. Back at the scene, Abigail White was arrested. But even during her interrogation, she stuck to a version of events that didn't add up. At first, she claimed Bradley had stabbed himself. She then changed her story, claiming he had wrestled the knife from her. Later, she insisted Bradley had grabbed her hand, which was holding the knife, and forced it into himself. The narrative kept shifting, each version seemingly tailored to avoid blame. Unbeknownst to Abigail, there was a silent witness. Her 3-year-old son had seen it all. Incredibly, despite his age, the child was able to give police a clear and damning statement. "Mommy stabbed Daddy." It was a heartbreaking confirmation of what investigators already suspected. The evidence was overwhelming, and eventually, Abigail could no longer deny what she had done. She confessed, but claimed it had been a moment of passion. She insisted she hadn't meant to kill Bradley, only to hurt him in a moment of rage. But one detail was impossible to ignore. Abigail never called an ambulance. While Bradley lay dying on the floor, she chose to mop up his blood, toss his shirt in the wash, and stage the scene. She claimed she'd tried to call for help, but couldn't get a signal. Yet, she managed to contact a friend to spin a story about end his own life. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered chilling internet searches made by Abigail in the days leading up to the murder. She had looked up how to tie a noose and whether someone could die from a broken heart. On March 17th, just 1 week before the killing, she also searched for miscarriage-related topics and information about stabbing incidents. In October 2022, Abigail White stood trial at Bristol Crown Court. The prosecution presented a large amount of evidence. This included security camera footage from the pub concerning TikTok videos she posted, voice messages, and over 200 statements from witnesses. Her plea to downgrade the charge to manslaughter was rejected. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 18 years. Psychiatrists testified that Abigail suffers from borderline personality disorder, a diagnosis rooted in the profound trauma of her early life. But mental illness alone couldn't excuse the choices she made. Today, Abigail White remains behind bars. Reports have surfaced suggesting she is in a new relationship. It's a fact that continues to anger many who knew and loved Bradley. Still reeling from the loss, his family expressed what so many felt, that no sentence could truly reflect the life that was stolen. They say they were given their own life sentence, waking up each day to a reality without their son, brother, and father of 3. Bradley's memory, however, lives on. Hundreds attended his funeral, and public memorials now stand in his honor. His kindness, his love for his children, and his enduring popularity are remembered by all who knew him. To them, he is not gone. He is still their son, still a father, still loved, and always will be. Julie Irene Oldag, later known as Julie Keown, had a peaceful and happy childhood in the town of Plattsburgh, Missouri, located in the heart of the American Midwest. Born on May 16, 1973, she was the eldest of two children. Growing up alongside her younger brother, Chad, Julie's parents, Nancy and Jack, were well-respected members of the community. They lived modestly but comfortably, sustained by their farm work. Growing up on the farm taught Julie responsibility and humility. Julie left a lasting impression on everyone she met. She was empathetic, selfless, and always ready to help others, with a calming presence that put people at ease. Her quiet strength and sense of purpose developed early. Academically, she excelled thanks to the support of her loving family. She attended high-quality schools and consistently earned praise from her teachers. Her compassion eventually inspired her to pursue a career in nursing. Determined to make a difference, she enrolled at William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri. There, she not only thrived academically, but also formed close friendships. However, she sometimes felt as though something was missing. Seeing many of her friends embark on romantic relationships, Julie was eager to find someone to spend her life with. Through a mutual friend, she was set up on a blind date with fellow student James Keown. James, a year younger than Julie, had a personality that contrasted with hers. Charismatic, outgoing, and ambitious, James was well known on campus for his work at the college radio station and his aspirations for a career in broadcasting. Coming from a privileged background, James was the son of a respected lobbyist and his wife, Betty, who had high hopes for their 6 children. James stood out in his family for his bold, confident personality and ability to command attention, traits that were both admired and controversial. In Julie, he found a calm, gentle presence that complemented his own strong energy. Meanwhile, Julie was attracted to James's drive and enthusiasm. Their connection was instantaneous, and they soon became inseparable, forming a well-known couple on campus. While still in college, James began working as a local radio host, quickly becoming a familiar voice in the community. Julie remained focused on her nursing studies and clinical training, preparing for the challenges of her career. After graduating, they married and moved to Kansas City, eager to build their life together. Both flourished professionally. Julie became a nurse whose empathy and dedication to her work made her exceptional. She treated each patient with care and respect, earning the admiration of her colleagues and superiors. Meanwhile, James continued to advance in his radio career, managing roles at 2 stations and steadily building his reputation. Together, they appeared to have a perfect life, young, ambitious, and dedicated to their professions. Their relationship was built on shared values, mutual support, and a balance of Julie's calm demeanor and James's outgoing nature. However, as James's career grew, so did the demands on his time. His schedule became packed with meetings and side projects, leaving little time for rest or quality time together. Although their home was filled with love, it often felt empty due to their busy lives. Both juggled early mornings, long days, and late nights, caught up in a fast-paced rhythm. Despite his hectic schedule, James made an effort to keep their relationship strong. He surprised Julie with weekend trips and thoughtful gifts, small tokens of his affection that she deeply appreciated, even though she never asked for them. Julie adored James deeply, her love for him unwavering and steadfast. Since James's career required frequent moves, they adapted by living in cities like Chicago before eventually returning to Kansas. Although these relocations were challenging, Julie supported James wholeheartedly, adjusting to each new environment with grace. James was known professionally for his creativity, adaptability, and sharp mind. With a background in marketing, his skills and innovative ideas made him an invaluable employee, which was reflected in his impressive income. His family enjoyed a comfortable, and privileged lifestyle, owning a beautiful home and traveling frequently. He appreciated luxury, wearing fine watches, driving new cars, and regularly upgrading them. In contrast, Julie valued simple pleasures. Her family noticed how well she seemed to be doing and felt happy about her marriage to James, which outwardly appeared both harmonious and successful. As time passed, relatives began to inquire about their plans to have children. However, for James and Julie, this was a painful subject. They had been trying to conceive for years without success, despite undergoing countless tests, consulting specialists, and exploring every available option. There was no medical explanation for their infertility. Despite the hardship, they remained hopeful and continued with their lives, bearing the heavy weight of uncertainty. James redirected his focus to his career, pursuing personal growth and professional recognition. Already well regarded in his local community as a radio presenter, James set his sights higher. In 2003, he applied to Harvard Business School and was accepted with a prestigious scholarship. This achievement transformed their lives. They moved to Boston so James could start his studies. While Julie transitioned to remote work in medical software development, James also took on remote marketing projects. Although Julie wholeheartedly supported his ambitions, the move created emotional challenges for her. She missed her family, their home in Missouri, and the sense of familiarity she had left behind. Nevertheless, her love for James and her pride in his accomplishments kept her devoted to him. At Harvard, James surrounded himself with influential people and worked hard to build an impressive public image. Yet, despite his many achievements, he always seemed to crave more. Meanwhile, Julie continues to hope for a baby, although her health begins to decline alarmingly. Around 8 months after their move to Boston, she started experiencing constant fatigue, muscle pain, and frequent illnesses. Multiple medical exams provided no clear answers. Then, on August 20th, 2004, her condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. She woke up disoriented, with severe headaches, and found herself unable to perform basic tasks. She slurred her words, struggled to write, and felt the world spinning. Alarmed, James rushed her to the hospital, where her symptoms quickly worsened. Doctors immediately recognized the seriousness of her condition and conducted urgent tests. Suspicion fell on her kidneys as her health declined rapidly. By August 2004, Julie received life-changing news: her kidneys were no longer functioning properly. This became the first real clue to her long-standing health struggles, including infertility, though the connection was not fully understood. Despite extensive testing, her symptoms, muscle weakness, confusion, and fatigue did not align entirely with typical kidney failure cases. Some doctors initially suspected that Julie might have a rare kidney condition, but they were unable to arrive at a definitive diagnosis. After spending 3 days in the hospital, her condition unexpectedly improved without any clear medical intervention. With no solid explanation for her symptoms beyond potential kidney issues, she was discharged. Although the doctors were baffled, her symptoms eased, and she became eager to move forward, hoping to recover both emotionally and physically. She took a short trip to Missouri to visit her family, surrounded by loved ones and the comforting familiarity of home. Julie's spirits lifted, her strength returned, and her family was relieved to see her smiling and full of energy once more. It seemed the worst was behind her. However, this relief was short-lived. Not long after returning to Boston, Julie's health declined again. Her symptoms, dizziness, fatigue, and speech difficulties resurfaced. Albeit less severe than before, her family grew increasingly concerned, speculating that her episodes might have a psychological origin, perhaps stemming from the stress of relocating, the emotional strain of infertility, or even feelings of homesickness. Even Julie's doctors entertained the possibility that stress was a contributing factor. Yet, despite these theories, the possibility of a more serious underlying condition couldn't be ruled out. Tragically, on September 4, 2004, just 2 weeks after her initial hospitalization, Julie's condition took a dramatic and alarming turn for the worse. She was admitted to the hospital again, gravely ill, barely able to speak, nearly completely paralyzed, and soon slipping into a coma. It became evident to the medical team that her kidneys were not the primary issue. Something far more destructive and mysterious was ravaging her body. Despite extensive testing, the doctors were unable to pinpoint the cause, and Julie's organs began to fail one by one. In an unexpected breakthrough, a nurse made a critical suggestion: conduct a toxicology screening. Although such a test was uncommon in cases like Julie's, the nurse's intuition proved to be pivotal. The toxicology report revealed a horrifying truth. Julie had ethylene glycol in her system, a poisonous chemical commonly found in antifreeze and engine coolant. The symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning, kidney failure, confusion, and severe physical decline matched Julie's condition perfectly. The report confirmed she had been deliberately poisoned. As Julie lay comatose and unresponsive on September 4th, her family rushed to the hospital, devastated by her deterioration. Helpless to do anything but wait, they watched her condition worsen. After 4 days in a coma, on September 8, 2004, Julie passed away at the age of 31. Despite the relentless efforts of the medical team, the diagnosis had come too late. Her body had suffered too much damage to recover. Her sudden death left her family and friends in shock. Only days earlier, she had been laughing and talking with her loved ones. Now, she was gone. The toxicology findings immediately raised suspicions of foul play. Julie's parents were convinced that someone had intentionally poisoned her, and all signs pointed to someone close to her. Suspicion quickly fell on her husband, James. Detectives launched an investigation, as the presence of ethylene glycol automatically triggered a criminal inquiry. They gathered medical records, household items, and witness statements to piece together what had happened. Publicly, James presented himself as a grieving widower, expressing shock and sorrow over Julie's untimely death. He denied any involvement, even speculating that she might have accidentally or intentionally ingested antifreeze during a moment of depression brought on by her health struggles, their move to Boston, and their inability to conceive. However, not everyone believed his claims. The nurse who initially suggested the toxicology screening later reported that James's behavior during Julie's hospital stay had been unsettling. He often dominated conversations with doctors, frequently answering questions on Julie's behalf and giving the impression that he was controlling her care. Some people argued James's actions were likely a result of Julie's illness. Perhaps he was simply trying to advocate for her when she couldn't speak for herself. However, others found his behavior suspicious. At one point, James even suggested a peculiar theory, claiming that Julie might have mistakenly consumed antifreeze, believing it to be a different liquid. Investigators became more suspicious upon learning that Julie had a $250,000 life insurance policy. At first glance, this might not seem like a strong motive for her husband, James, who seemed to live a comfortable life. However, doubts began to arise. Was James as wealthy as he appeared, or was his wealth just an illusion? Shortly after Julie's death, a new clue came to light. The landlord of James and Julie's Boston apartment contacted the authorities after James suddenly disappeared, leaving the apartment and abandoning personal belongings such as Julie's wedding dress, their wedding rings, and photos from their wedding. Items a grieving husband would typically treasure. It was soon revealed that James had returned to Missouri, where he began a new job as a talk show host at a local radio station, seemingly eager to start afresh. Investigators uncovered troubling details about James's life in Boston. He hadn't paid rent for months, his luxury car had been repossessed, and, shockingly, he had forged a letter claiming he had been accepted into Harvard Business School, a lie he used to justify working remotely for a marketing company. This company had hired him for a high-paying project to design a website, but he failed to deliver results and appeared to lack the necessary skills for the job. Instead, he embezzled funds allocated for the project. His resume was filled with fabricated job experiences, including positions at companies where he had never worked. Even Julie, his wife, was unaware of the full extent of his deceit. Despite pretending to go to work, buying new furniture, and maintaining a luxurious lifestyle, James's financial troubles deepened. He had no stable income. His utilities were about to be cut off, and he was drowning in debt. At some point, Julie's life insurance policy became a potential solution to James's mounting financial problems. Back in Missouri, James shared inconsistent stories about Julie's death with his new acquaintances. Some say she died of a mysterious illness. Others say she harmed herself. When asked what he planned to do with the insurance money, he casually remarked that he would buy a BMW. He also mentioned dating someone new and wanting to start a family. As suspicion grew, investigators turned their attention to James. Although his behavior raised numerous red flags, the evidence against him remained circumstantial. Friends recalled James confidently boasting that he couldn't be convicted because there was no direct proof. Oddly, however, he never explicitly denied involvement in Julie's death. Investigators conducted thorough searches of his Boston apartment, his family's property, and his home in Missouri, but nothing incriminating was found until they examined his computer. Despite his attempts to wipe his hard drive clean, forensic experts recovered disturbing internet searches, such as how to get rid of someone and antifreeze poisoning. These searches aligned with Julie's toxicology results. Investigators also discovered that James had encouraged Julie to drink Gatorade weeks before her death, claiming it was good for her health. Toxicology tests would later reveal that she had been poisoned with ethylene glycol, the main ingredient in antifreeze, over an extended period, explaining the mysterious illness she suffered before her death. Based on this evidence, prosecutors began building their case. In 2005, James was arrested, and his trial began in 2008. Although much of the evidence was circumstantial, it painted a consistent and damning picture of James, his financial ruin, fraudulent lifestyle, and the timing of Julie's poisoning all pointed to him. Many who had once admired James were shocked to learn the extent of his lies, though some described him as a loving husband and found it difficult to believe he could commit such a calculated crime. The defense argued that Julie may have deliberately or accidentally ingested the antifreeze herself, citing her emotional struggles with poor health and infertility. They also questioned the reliability of the toxicology reports, suggesting there was no concrete evidence that James had administered the poison. Despite their efforts to cast doubt the search history, James's encouragement for Julie to drink Gatorade, the life insurance motive, and his pattern of deceit proved overwhelming for the jury. Although no physical container of antifreeze was found, the evidence revealed Julie had been gradually poisoned. In her final weeks, she had confided in friends that James had been attentive and had repeatedly urged her to drink Gatorade, despite her dislike of it. What is most suspicious is that after Julie passed away, James rushed to claim the insurance money and quickly moved on with his life, making his behavior even more suspicious. In 2008, James Keown was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court concluded that he had deliberately and methodically poisoned his wife by spiking her drinks with ethylene glycol, ultimately causing her death. To this day, James continues to maintain his innocence. However, Julie's family firmly believes that justice was appropriately served. In 2017, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court upheld his conviction, stating that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Julie Keown, remembered as a compassionate nurse, a devoted wife, and a loving daughter, was tragically taken from the world far too soon. Her kindness, sincerity, and grace live on in the memories of those who knew her and in the relentless pursuit of truth that arose following her untimely passing.